Welcome to today's What's in a Game. We have writer Matt Moore with us, and we're going to talk everything Nuggets preseason and some of the bright spots, as well as answering some questions as well from fans and friends. We'll project our hopes and dreams for the rest of the season, and Matt may dash them. I don't know. We'll see where he ends up. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Will Jones, here as always with Grace Jean, and perhaps our most famous guest. What do you think?
Yes, I am very excited to introduce Matt Moore, the co-host of Locked On Nuggets. He's also a host of Buckets on the Action Network, and maybe his most famous moniker of all is the big bad of Nuggets Twitter at HP Basketball. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're excited to get into it. Lots of stuff to get into with the preseason. But before we jump into all of that, I wanted to quickly recap the WNBA finals. So game 1 and game 2 have already happened, and we are tied at 1-1 between the Liberty and the Lynx. Game 1 took years off of my life. I don't know if you watched any of that, Matt. The Lynx overcame a 15-point deficit in the final 5 minutes of play off of a 4-point go-ahead bucket from Courtney Williams. Offensive rebound, kick out, foul. I don't understand why the Liberty didn't foul up 3 here. I was like screaming it. Foul up 3 people. Okay. Following this play, Breanna Stewart actually missed what would have been a game-winning free throw in regulation. And then Nafisa Collier ends up getting the game-winning fadeaway in overtime, which you can play this one right here, Will. Oh my gosh.
There's a little pivot.
Beautiful.
You just know that I don't think I've seen her miss one of the free throw line jumpers at all. She's missed some other shots, but like from right there, just cash, and I just know it was going in. I'm like, okay, this is over. But then Brianna missed the would have been a game tying buzzer beater in overtime layup, which meant that the Lynx were able to, complete this highly unlikely comeback, but that is what happens. Actually, the finals have drawn record viewership according to ESPN. So game 1, 1.1 million, the most in any finals game until game 2, which was 1.34 million viewers. So that just kind of tells you the buzz that happened, I think, after game 1. Like, you need to be watching this series. In game 2, it was almost a redux of game 1, honestly. The Liberty went up big. They led by as much as 17 in game 2. They led by as much as 18 in game 1. Then the Lynx were just chipping away at that lead in the second half. But thanks to some ravenous, I'd say, defense from Breanna Stewart, she had some really clutch, I think, steals in key moments when the Lynx were trying to mount another comeback to help, keep everything at bay on the defensive end. And they ended up holding the Lynx to only 66 points. So for all the real hoop sickos out there, this series is for you. I definitely underestimated New York defensively in this series. I was more worried about how they defend the Lynx and how they'd be defended by the Lynx. Clearly, I had that flip-flopped because they really won game 2 off the back of their defense. I think in both when they were building their lead and when they were trying to stymie the Lynx's comeback. So it's just going to be interesting to watch how these different teams adjust to each other, because I think for the most part, both teams have done a really good job at their peaks of keeping the stars bottled up, right? I don't think that Breanna Stewart has had a great offensive series. I don't think Sabrina's had a great offensive series, at least in terms of scoring. I think in game 2, she was a much better facilitator than she was in game 1 for sure. And it just kind of reminds me of, Will, when you and I were doing our series preview for the Timberwolves, and we talked about how this needs to be a Jamal playmaking series. It was not at all. And yeah, just versus that kind of defense, you need to keep the ball moving and going to capitalize on every little advantage that they're going to give you, because the Lynx remind me so much of the Minnesota Timberwolves and how they defend.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a comp there, but I don't know. I'll just tell you, like, I'm not the only person in the world that I have this power rated as the Lynx being the favorite. Like, I genuinely think that they're better. Genuinely think that they're better. And it's like, the counter to that is very simple. Like, well, the Liberty have led by double digits in each game and won 7 of 8 quarters. So, and I get it. I do think that home court advantage was a big edge, especially in game 2. Like that, the biggest thing for me is that game 2 should have been a wipeout, and the final score does not reflect how close that game was. And the fact that the Liberty down 0-1, if you want to say like, yeah, but that was like a fluky game 1, okay. But the Lynx were able to keep that game within range for them to be able to pull off that comeback, and were able to out execute New York down the stretch. Regardless, like, they stole one. Okay, they stole one. That means in game 2, the Liberty should have come out and absolutely demolished them. And they didn't.
Right.
Like, it was like they got up huge early, and I was like, okay, here we go. And then, nope, it's pretty close at half. And then, nope, it's pretty close after 3 quarters. And then late fourth quarter, it's 2. And then the Liberty managed to get away and kind of outrun them. And you mentioned kind of the defense. I think I need to go back and do better work on the film. But from first watch, I'll say that a lot of this is that the Lynx are a little bit more shot variant than the Liberty, because Liberty have better offensive players, right? So it's a little bit more shot variance oriented. But I thought they just had bad outcomes. I'm not sure Liberty process was all that great. I think the effort level was high. And so we're like, oh, what great defense. But I'm also kind of like, I don't know. I kind of think that they'll hit more shots next time. So I very much like the chances of the Lynx in this series. I think that everyone continues to kind of underestimate that team because of the notion of the Liberty. And I just continue to wonder, are we really going to get, like, if you think that they played that well defensively in game 2, are we going to get that for another 3 games consistently, 2 out of 3? Because I don't know if we are. And that gives the Lynx a real chance to win the series.
I think that you make some really great points about the advantage that the Lynx have in this series. I think they've been excellent defensively, honestly, on the Liberty. Like, the Liberty won that game scoring 80 points. That's not good even for the WNBA in terms of offense. I will say that I agree with you that there was a lot of tough shot making. That's the other thing I didn't mention about game 2. Like, Benijah Laney Hamilton really, like, I think saved their asses in the second half of that game with just really tough shot making to try to stave off the Lynx comeback. My thing is that the Liberty offense, although it's been stifled, especially when, like, in the second halves of these games, they're generating their shots easier than the Lynx are. It reminded me of watching the series versus the Aces, where, like, the Aces were scoring, but I'm like, these are not good shots. The Lynx are getting some better shots than the Aces were, but they're not getting them easily, or at least as easily as I feel like the Liberty are. The last thing I wanted to say about the Lynx is, actually, you talked about how the Wolves are kind of a weird comp for them. When we had Lucas Kaplan on the show, he pointed out their last in the league rebounding rate, and I was like, oh, they're like OKC, actually, as good. And like underrated because of that, but then also, like, they have the size issues and all of this, but they can force turnovers too, and they can play the possession game in different ways as well. Anyway, I just wanted to shout out a couple of my favorite WNBA plugs for the content fiends out there. If you're like me and you just want deeper and deeper analysis on this really, really fun series, check out the Dunker Spot. We had friend of the show, Steve Jones, hosting that with Nikias Duncan, Lucas Kaplan on Twitter, and you can find his stuff at Nets Daily. And the new Ringer WNBA show has been really great with Sarat Sohi. I'm really enjoying that one. And actually, Matt's colleague, Maria Marino, I've caught a couple of her spots on the WNBA finals as well.
Sirit, I know Sirit used to write for my site Hardwood Paroxysm back in the day, as did Rob Mahoney. So,
oh wow, the writer tree for Matt Moore is
very
prolific.
proud of those two. I've known them since they were very young, and they are phenomenal writers and analysts. So definitely support their content, The Ringer.
And both great podcasters.
Yep.
You know, you seem to be very defensive of the team that's going against the New York team. And I have to ask, does everyone else at the Action Network live in New York and root for New York sports teams?
Yes, basically. trying to think if like there's anybody. Like Brandon Anderson doesn't. My direct report doesn't. She lives in Denver. A few other folks live in LA, but for the most part, like so many of our people. Like if I have to hear one more thing about the Knicks, like after everything, my guys are like 82-0, and I'm just like, at least they don't say Bing Bong. That's like the only advantage. Bing Bong's been outlawed. There's none of that going on.
Yeah, I mean, I had that question queued up because of how passionately you were defending the honor, I guess, of the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs last year, particularly during the Knicks series, but also during the Bucks series.
Yeah, I mean, I just think there does tend to be these teams that everyone just kind of dismisses, and I was pretty high on the Pacers coming into those playoffs and their opportunities because the path was in front of them. And what kind of happens is if you beat a team that's injured, it's like you're actually considered worse than you were before the injury. And I'm like, that's not how this should go. Like, I've been really interested. I've been thinking a lot over the last probably 2 months about the word sentiment and about how our priors on things that we think about and believe, how that influences us to develop sentiments about whatever it is, like whatever you're talking about or whatever you have an opinion on. In sports, we see this a lot where it's like, well, I really think the Knicks are good. Okay, so you have a sentiment about them. Inherently, you're going to be like, and the Sixers, and Embiid's injured, and Paul George, and like they don't have the depth. And it's like, okay, but now what you're doing is you're using this to kind of contrast it. And that happened a lot with the Pacers, where I was like, look, they're competing in this series. At the beginning of that Knicks series, I was like, I think they have a chance here. Like, I don't love this matchup for New York. I think they have a chance here. And the problem again is, do the Knicks win that series if all of the Knicks pets' heads don't fall off? Probably. Like they probably win that series, right? Like everybody's hurt. OG and Brunson and Randall and Robinson, like down the line, they're just so banged up. And I get it. At the same time, the Knicks play a tough physical style, and that's going to happen. And that doesn't change the fact that like Nembhard was stones in that series, that Hallie really did respond when it was like everyone being like, wow, he is not a superstar. He just shrunk from the moment. And then he was great late in that series. Like, we can give credit for the teams that actually do this, but we don't tend to do that unless they come from certain markets. And that bugs the hell out of me.
But you're about to head into a big Knicks season. Are you prepared for that?
Well, it's going to be great because I have the under on their win total.
Nice.
So I'm like ready to go ahead and fade them.
What's their win
nice.
total right now?
52.5.
That's too many.
Like it's ridiculous where they're at. They're just, I get it because they upgraded him after the Cat trade. I can't dispute them coming up with going up with a higher one. I'm sorry, that's incorrect.
And they're in the East.
It's 54.5 now. Come on.
Dang.
Come on. So yeah, like my thing is, Bridges is redundant in a not good way with OG and Hart. They fundamentally lose the identity of that team last year, which was like the plucky, rough and tumble, tough defensive team. Like, you now have Cat. You're no longer like a rough and tumble defensive team, even though Cat was pretty good, like was a contributor for the best defense in the league last season. He could be a pretty good defender, but like not the same kind of identity.
Right.
You're still going to have the injury issues because Tibbs is going to run him into the ground. Mitchell Robinson's already out for an extended period of time.
Well, I don't know if that's a Tibbs thing. Like, it's not like he was playing high minutes on the season last year because he was also injured.
Right. But I will just say, like, if you don't, there is this idea of like, well, they won't be as injured, and the data doesn't really reflect that. If you look at the last like 13 years of data, the data shows that if you're in the worst percentile for injuries, you kind of bounce back to like only the 60th percentile. You tend to actually be a little bit more injured than league average, just based off of the frequency of games missed because of guys. Now, some of that's like carryover from previous season. But I also just look at this Knicks team and I'm like, if you look at last year, like they're not great at half court offense and they're only pretty good at half court defense. Like, this isn't like, what did the Knicks do at an elite level?
Offensive
Offensive rebounds, right? Like that they're elite there.
Yeah.
Then they traded
lost
Isaiah Hartenstein and Hart won't play as much. Like I just think that there's a lot more pathways. Plus, just taking the under on these win totals that are this high is often a pretty good move. So I feel really good about the Knicks probably not living up to expectations next season. Though I think they have a very good chance to match up with the Celtics in the playoffs and potentially sneak past them into the finals.
Yeah, let's move on to some injury status updates. We've been getting all kinds of rumors swirling and people discussing Kawhi and his knee soreness. Hasn't played any preseason, not necessarily any news on him. Any thoughts on Kawhi?
So I think the big problem, honestly, is that the impression I've been given from talking to people, and this, I will say this could be wrong because the inherent nature of secrecy of Kawhi makes it to where misinformation can be spread even about his lack of communication. But like this is one of the key problems is like there's just not good communication between Kawhi's camp and anybody. Like they just don't share information with the team. And so like there are oftentimes like this has been reported that there were times when it was like he would just like show up, be like, yeah, practicing today. Cool. And so you never really kind of know with Kawhi. I just don't think you can expect him you just can't expect him. That's kind of the thing is like it's entirely possible Kawhi plays 70 games this season. It's entirely possible Kawhi plays 30 games this season. Like you can't have any expectation of him. You just kind of have to kind of see the results and acknowledge it. And if it's like, well, I really like this Clippers team because when Kawhi is healthy, okay, but like that's going to be an if. Like you can't bank on the Clippers being healthy, and you can't bank on Kawhi being available. It's just like a random occurrence that may or may not happen.
Besides the Kawhi injury, of course, is Chris Middleton. He had his bilateral ankle surgeries this summer, and I don't believe has played at all in the preseason. I'm not sure if they're targeting an opening night return or later into the season. But also Joel Embiid came out with a whole story that he did with Bontemps on how he's going to be wearing a knee brace and avoiding back-to-backs, and he's taking his health a lot more seriously this year. He hasn't played in the preseason. Last season was there was a lot made about how the league was right to institute all these new policies to limit rest days and all this stuff. And I know like in the schedule, we talked about how they're trying to lower, not back-to-backs necessarily, but those like really dense parts of the schedule, like 3 and 5s and like 5 and 7s and things like that. But with all the injuries that guys are having, like before we even get into the season, plus those that were sustained last season, like we talked on this show a lot about how like these playoffs just feels really weird because it feels like there are just like injuries up and down all of these rosters, especially in the East, right? And a lot of the guys that we talked about now are also on these Eastern Conference teams. Do you think that the narrative on just like fan and like general outrage over player rest is going to cool down this season, or is it just going to continue being how it's been?
I think it cooled off last season because they played, right? Like a lot of guys played injured because they wanted to try and get to the 65 game limit. Now I'm not a proponent of the 65 game limit, in part because like Halliburton didn't need to be playing. Like Hallie did not need to be playing in January when he was that banged up. But it's a good example, honestly, of like it hurt his game and it was probably very difficult for him. But also like Tyrese Halliburton survived. He didn't die. This is part of the equation is that if you talk to players, there are injuries you can play through. It's a question of whether or not you should or have to. And like this is kind of the dividing line is if it's like, well, I don't need to play through this injury. Okay, but can you? Without further risk of injury? Yes. Okay, probably should tough it out and play. If it's this increases your risk of re-injury or further injury. Nope, sit out, right? Or if you're just like miserable, okay, sit out, get healthy, right? There are these lines because I think it's okay to feel like I think the league was correct that the players were missing too many games. Do I think the best answer to that is to shorten the schedule and then stretch it out so we have more time in between games? Absolutely. Will the players agree to it? No, because that means less money. Yeah. On top of the owners not agreeing to it because it's less money. And so what I wind up getting to is like, all right, when you sign the contract, you know what it's going to be. You know it's going to be 82 games. You know it's going to be mostly a game every other night, and you know there's going to be back-to-backs included. I don't think you need to play in back-to-backs. I think it's on the league's responsibility to remove back-to-backs from key matchups. I do not care if you skip versus the Charlotte Hornets on a Tuesday in January on the second night of a back-to-back. But if Charlotte's the first game on the back-to-back and the second game is versus a contender, play in the contender on national TV. They did much better with the schedule this year of getting the back-to-back games off of the national TV schedule. That's a huge step in the right direction. It's something that should have been addressed years ago. But like, there's got to be a balance here because my big thing with this is it's like I'm not obtuse to what the game takes from the players physically. One of the things I often say is if you go into an NBA locker room, you are going to see the toll. Like you're going to see what this looks like for guys that play every night and how much pain and discomfort that they're in. If you go to All-Star Weekend and you see the legends and you see the limps that those guys walk with, you realize what the game has taken from them physically. But there's a flip side of that, which is everything that the game has provided. And that's like something that players are aware of. Should we do everything we can to lessen that? Yes. But like there are inherent risks involved in this process. That's part of the reason the money is so good. So like there's got to be like a fair balance here between that. And I think that they were closer to it last season. I think some guys played too much. And I think that that's something that we can probably try and peel back on. The players have to kind of the other biggest thing here is just like get the money not tied to awards. Get it out. Get that away. The money cannot be tied to awards, because it's one thing if it's like, well, yeah, I want to make 65 games because I want to be all NBA, because I take pride in my game and I want the acknowledgement of how good I am. It's another thing when it's like, I want to play 65 games because I can make an extra $200 million. That should not be dictated by those types of things. The players should be able to be like, I'd like to make all NBA, but I need a 2 weeks off. I can't do this, man. That's where the league has got to shift to. There are all these changes that need to happen, but there does, I think, continue to be a reasonable expectation of players playing when healthy.
I thought there might even be some adjustment on those game requirements. Maybe even coming into this season, they didn't do that, obviously. So you expect that maybe they will adjust that at some point?
Yeah, I don't know, because like I think the way it's been presented to me is that the CBA is ironclad and neither side is going to want to touch it for fear of losing ground in a negotiation. That if you open up, if you say like we want to talk about and maybe amend this, that the other side's going to be like, oh, good, we also want to amend this thing. And because there's peace in the land and the new media deal, they don't want to disrupt that, which I get. I just
especially
feel like,
before expansion. Like,
yeah, then this media deal is very important, because that expansion deal, they're not going to get a cut for a number of years of the media deal. It's how that structure will be given. But it's frustrating because I'm just like, look, let's take the 65 game thing. If the teams are like, hey, we really don't want our players over pushing themselves and hurting our playoff chances trying to get to this award limit, and the players don't want it, and the fans are even like, I don't want to see like Tyrese on one leg. If nobody is in favor of this, then it should be like an easy, let's make a common sense adjustment. The apron, I think, is the second apron, I think, is a really reasonable thing to be like, hey, so good idea, but it turns out that this is killing us. Like, there should be a reasonable adjustment to make to that. The players are obviously going to be frustrated by the limitation of salaries and spending. The teams are frustrated by the limits that it puts on their flexibility and trying to build a contender and keep their jobs. And the owners are happy because they get to curtail spending and not get blamed for it. But you should still be able to be like, look, can we make some sort of adjustment on this to make it a little less punitive? So maybe this is just more of like a, hey, you really want to be sure, rather than a death knell kind of deal. These should be very easy adjustments for a CBA, but any person that is legal adjacent is like, oh no, you don't want to touch the CBA once it's agreed to. Oh no. So I'm kind of like, okay, I guess we're stuck with this until the next time they negotiate, which sucks.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the length of the season, and I just recently learned that hockey also has an 82 game season. I'm like, where did this idea of an 82 game season even come from? That sounds insane, but it's just kind of been that way. And so that will also likely continue.
I think it was fine. I also think it was probably fine when these sports were invented. And I always often wonder, like, were there always injuries and we just don't remember them because it wasn't documented as in depth?
Well,
right?
yeah, because guys weren't as soft as they are today.
I mean, that's a suggestion, right? And like Jordan missed an entire season with a foot injury. Like that happened early on in his career, and like that never gets talked about. But like that's a thing that happened. LeBron has not, knock on wood. So I do think that the acceleration of the intensity of athlete explosiveness has definitely contributed to the soft tissue injuries across the board.
Yeah,
there's a lot of evidence for that. For me, the counter to all this is I just continue to believe that if you reduce the schedule and spread it out, that you're going to get so much better games. Yeah. Because every single player I talk to is like, if you give me 3 days off, that next day, like that game, I'm going to be great. I'm going to be so much better than I am when it's every other night. And you would have more lead up time to promote matchups. Like I think about a lot of this with American sports, because all these others are like, in 3 days time. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with the NBA because it's just you can't even game plan. Drives me nuts. Anyway, yeah, they should shorten the schedule.
Well, the listeners have gotten a little taste of how deeply you analyze all these different aspects of the NBA, but you definitely do cover the Nuggets, Matt. And in case anybody hasn't heard, Matt is not a Nuggets fan. I was wondering why it's so important to you that readers and listeners of your consumers of your various content streams know that you're not a fan of the team that you cover.
One, I want to be very transparent and honest about my intentions because I think the agenda it's a very large part of the modern media environment, and it's not always a negative. I think it's okay for you to be. I think there's a lot of ways in which it's good if you're a fan of a team and an analyst. Like, I don't think you can look at Adam Maraz's work and be like, it really cost him that he's a Nuggets fan. Like, you just can't say that.
No.
Right? Like, he benefits from the passion that he has for it and that connection that he's able to build with people. But for me, like, I'm not necessarily looking to I would like to build a community of people that appreciate the work and that appreciate their opinions, but I don't want to build something across a shared love. Like, that's not what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to always maintain that objectivity. I do find the reason so many people think I'm a Nuggets fan is because I do talk about the team favorably because they're the team I cover. And I've kind of come to accept it's inevitable. Like, you're just never going to be able to cover a team and not feel a preferential way towards them because of your experience with the people, not just the players or the coaches or the front office, but I know the guy that's the security guard outside of the locker room and the people that work in the pantry. Like, there's all these people and the fans that are there at every single game. So that community has an impact on you. But I think for me, I do want it kind of known as look, if I'm saying something about Denver, if I say something positive, it's not coming from I want Denver to be good. It's they actually are good. I have trashed this team when they have been awful. I have absolutely ripped this team to shreds. When they make mistakes, I'm critical of them. And you try and be as honest and accurate is the biggest word I use. I want to be accurate. And I think it's really hard to be accurate when you're a fan because I think those agendas wind up impacting the way that you view things.
How long have you been covering the Nuggets, and how did you end up covering them in the first place?
This is my 13th season. I moved here in 2012. I was living in Kansas City and I got my first full-time writing job for CBS. And if you think in your head, there's not a Kansas City team. And so we needed to find a team where I could go to games. My wife was ready for a career change and wanted to go back to school. And so we looked for graduate schools in English that were near an NBA team. And then her family is from Western Nebraska. And so we kind of correlated the three. And I was like, yes, the Nuggets. Awesome. I was like, they have George Karl. He's not going anywhere. Masai Ujiri is the bright new GM everyone loves. He's going to be around for a decade. They have all these players that they can trade. They're going to be good for an infinite amount of time, like Gallo and Ty Lawson and Wilson Chandler. They have all these assets. This is a great situation. And then they lost to the Warriors and George got fired and Masai left and everything fell into darkness. And so that was very much a learning experience for me. But yeah, that's how I ended up in Denver. My wife actually lived here when I met her. I was living in Austin, Texas, and she lived here. And my parents used to live in Colorado Springs. So I was very familiar with Colorado. And so this made it a very easy transition for us. And we love living here. And I love living in Colorado.
Well, then the darkness was lifted and Jokic was drafted, and that was a pretty unique spot for you to be in with that type of player.
Was the darkness lifted when Jokic was drafted?
No, but I mean, eventually.
In time. Pretty quickly, actually, because the same year that he was drafted, Malone took over and they cleared out the roster. It was a simultaneous culture reset, get rid of the knuckleheads, and then really I try and remember what it was like, but it was oh yeah, hey, Jokic can play a little bit. And I was oh yeah, Jokic is pretty good. And then 3 years later, is Jokic the best player in the league? Is that a thing? So yeah, it was quick.
So at any given moment, if you check your replies, you are a Jokic hater and a Nuggets antagonist. But the next minute, you check the next set of replies, you're a Jamal Murray apologist. I like to call this the duality of fan. But your account really is kind of like a fan Rorschach test when you follow it kind of consistently. And I was listening to your appearance on the Basketball Feelings podcast with Katie Heindel. So I know that you went to school for psychology. So I have to ask, is your Twitter account a psychological experiment?
It is not a psychological experiment. I will tell you, I am fascinated by fan behavior. I love that all these different fan bases have like different identities. That some fans, like Bulls fans, are nihilists, just complete nihilists.
I mean, understandably.
Nuggets fans were very woebegone with Nug life for years and years and years. And then you have fans like the Sixers and the Rockets and the Lakers who are assholes. And like, that's just like their identity. And so like, there's like all these different ways that you can kind of look at it. I think one of the things is I talk to the fans as much as I do because I still hold this. And like, there's a lot of people that disagree with me and are like, you shouldn't do this because it's beneath you. And I agree that it's beneath me when I let it impact me mentally, but that's more a sign of where I'm at than it is where they are. I do at my core believe that everybody deserves to have their opinion heard. That like, okay, if you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm expressing this opinion or I have this question, that like, I don't think I'm better than you. I don't think that I'm above you. And so like, I want to be able to respond to those things and try and have a conversation because I do learn a lot from fans. I do think like it's one of the things is I follow so many accounts because I want to try and learn from them. I'm always on Reddit searching through things to try and find information. I listen to the other Locked On podcasts because I want to hear what those fans are saying about their team because you'll pick up on little bits of information that provide the tapestry. And like for me, that's my entire approach is I am not a focused individual. I'm not like, well, I care about this and I don't care about all this other stuff. I care about all of it. Like you need to synthesize the entire league and as much information as possible. And so you can learn a lot. I do find though that for me, there's always a struggle with, I mentioned the agendas thing. I'm just by nature and by the education that I got, and I think it was more that like I have this feeling and then I pursued that education of just like these biases and feelings that you have are going to impact your starting point in any opinion, discussion, analysis. Okay, but like, is that real? Is that true? It can be true. You can be biased and right. That happens all the time. But I'm really interested in that kind of dynamic to discover, all right, do you feel this way because you've looked at the evidence and this is the conclusion? Or do you feel this way because it's what you want? And that question of those two things, I think, is interesting to kind of parse through.
I think it's clear that that's what you do. Obviously, fans may be upset when your opinion doesn't align with what they want. And there are some fans' tolerances who do better with criticism and some who don't. But we did have a question from our friend, Mile High Aki, who asked
A little
you,
tongue in cheek.
what is the secret to being the jolliest fella in NBA media? And I feel like what you just went over kind of covers that. I honestly do think you do give people a pretty fair shake. You maybe sometimes can be appropriately harsh, I think, in your response, which I love personally. Is there anything you want to add?
So I think what's interesting here is the perception from Twitter, and I think even on Locked On Nuggets, because I'm going to be pretty critical in the analysis. I think there's an idea of like the idea of like, you must be a miserable human being, or because I complain so much about this, that, or the other with the league. I don't think anybody could spend as much time as I do on this if they didn't love it. I just don't think that they could. Even if the money was much, 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 much better than it is, I don't think you could do it. And I think that it would reflect a lot more in the way that I cover it. You can make a lot of you can levy criticism against my conclusions because I think I'm often wrong, but you can't criticize the question of whether or not I'm working. Like this isn't a TV thing where it's like, they're just not like, unless they can get some rebounds, when it's like, well, actually they lead the league in rebounding rate. You see that on television a lot. They're just like these things that are clearly based off of prior opinions that haven't been updated. Like I do the work. And the reality is in my day-to-day life, though I struggle with mental health like everybody I think does, I have a really wonderful family. I get to do a job that I absolutely love, and my life's really pretty good. I'm pretty happy most of the time. I'm pretty optimistic most of the time. And I just think that we tend to believe that these things, I once asked Howard Beck, who I think belongs in the Hall of Fame. I asked him on a CBS podcast, I said, how much of the players that we talked to, how much of them do you think we get? What slice of them do we get? And the answer was really interesting, talking about it's somewhere between 25 and 40%. And that's like the reality is like, we don't know each other. Like I never, ever assume I know what type of person any of the players that I cover are, because I only get one shade of them for very limited pieces of time in one direct setting. And you just can't make conclusions about who these people are. I've covered Nikola Jokic for 10 years. I have no idea who he is. No idea. I know who he is with me. I know who he is on the court. I know what people say about him, but that's it. And I think that we would all do better to kind of leave open the possibility and not fill in the blanks on people we don't know.
I wanted to ask you about a prediction or piece of analysis that you had last preseason that I found to be particularly insightful. One of the most, I think, salient things that I heard as a prediction going into last NBA season was that the Warriors in particular might have a season where they are reaching really deep down to find that magic that they had during their run, and it just wouldn't be there. So I have to ask, what was your reaction watching the Warriors reach so deep down that they disemboweled themselves versus the Sacramento Kings in the play-in?
I mean, you always want to be right. It always feels good when you make a prediction and it comes right, because you're going to get so many things wrong. So you're like, you hold on to those very tightly. But one of the things that is better about that is just to be like, okay, you have a theory and you've tested it. And a lot of times it's not always going to come true. But in this case, like, it's another piece of evidence to kind of use. Like, oh, I learned something. Like, okay, I had this theory existing of these teams that I've seen in this position before. And even if it's not even questioning the theory itself, it's more, this is who the Warriors are now. And they're going to have to reinvent themselves if they're not going to fall into this trap again. I think you can argue this season that they at least look like they are, because the young kids have taken a step and it looks like the new additions are providing what they were designed to provide. But I do think it's like, it's foreshadowing, right? Where, okay, Clay reached down and didn't have it, but everyone's like, but Draymond and Curry are fine. And I'm like, look, Curry's last 2 months of the season, some of the metrics really showed a slide. And if he reaches down and it's not there all the time, what does that mean for Golden State? It presents like a whole bunch of different questions. So I think it's very important. Take the wins because they're very rare, because sports is unpredictable. But I also think it's like really important to instead, like when you're right about something, try and learn something from what you were right about. I think that's the big thing.
Well, let's move on to what we may be right or wrong about in assessing the Nuggets specifically this preseason, because they have yet to win a game, which you have warned fans may be more concerning than they may think on the outset, since we're so often just writing preseason off. So we're going to do a real or fake segment that we've done on the show before, and we're going to start with their expected win total. You had a great stat on Locked On the other day about teams who didn't win a preseason game and the frequency in which they failed to hit that total. So where are you standing on Denver Nuggets going into the season? Real or fake that they go under?
Since 2013, teams that are winless in the preseason are 7-3 to the under on their expected win total. I lean heavily towards the under. I bet the under when the numbers first came out at 52.5. That was too high. At 50.5, I am a very content to pass and just lean heavily on the under. Projections, I have them lower. That's not uncommon because they don't grade out in a lot of the key metrics for me that indicate that usually are how you can extrapolate team strength. And so if they are not as good in clutch time, and even last year, their clutch time record wasn't all that phenomenal, wasn't standout. And so you can be like, they won 57 games and their clutch time record wasn't insane. So what does that say? I think there's a lot of indications that this is probably an under season. There's just like a wide disparity between an under season and a flaming disaster. And trying to figure that out is, I think, where most of the reporters, fans, and analysts are at right now with this team. So I would lean heavily towards the under, but with the market currently at 50.5, moving down a full 2 wins, I can't recommend it because I think Jokic might just be automatically worth 50 with a reasonable supporting cast, which he absolutely has.
People may be confused about preseason and what might translate to regular season. Mike Malone even talked about in his presser after the last game that we lost about the guys really playing, the true rotations being there, that they'll be fine for the most part. He says there's things they need to fix. What things from the preseason might carry over to regular season, if anything?
I think most of the stat stuff, actually, I think you can toss. So this is what's kind of funny is I'm sitting here telling you that the record matters, but the numbers don't. Shooting variance is going to be very, very wild in preseason. Like, it's just, you will look up and down and be like, oh, this guy was absolutely wretched. And depending on the player's narrative, it matters. If Jalen Brunson goes 3 of 12, no one's going to bat an eye. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, Brunson didn't shoot well in the preseason game. But if Jamal goes 3 of 12, oh God, Jamal's broken, right? And so that's where you really can't do it because you kind of need to.
Well, I would be like, oh my God, Jamal took 12 threes? That's great.
Right. So like, you kind of have to kind of blanket everything in preseason with the stats with the preseason thing. The win-loss thing, the reason I think it matters is you need to find a way to win a game. Like, you need to be able to find, you can't be so bad that you lose all of them. Now, like the 2008 Celtics, winless in preseason, won the title. So like, there's always these counter.
I was going to ask, has a team ever gone winless in preseason and won the title?
Yeah, 2008 Celtics. So it's entirely possible. I'm just telling you that it's not the way I would kind of put it is it's not a good sign. Like, that's what I would largely tell you. Because if you want to say, like, what about the 2008 Celtics? And I would say, yeah, they won the title. There's also the 2013 Lakers, who was one of the absolute greatest just train wrecks. Flaming train wreck into a hazmat zone that you have ever seen. And they were winless in preseason. Conversely, by the way, teams that go undefeated in preseason are 11-5 to the over on their win total. They outperform expectations because they have momentum and things are going well and the team's bought in and there's energy. And a lot of this just does get into like a vibes thing. I really do think that this is a thing. I do tend to make adjustments based off of preseason play, based off of, does this team look like they're engaged and excited and ready to go? Or do they look like, either if they're a bad team, yeah, no, we're going to be awful and I'm just here for the check, the Wizards, or yeah, we're supposed to contend, but I'm just like so tired and bored, which is more like what I've seen a few times at Ball Arena.
Is that something you often account for in like your analysis and your models? And, obviously you're around the team a lot, so you have more insight into that often. And I think there was some part of the Nuggets that talked about their vibes being low on the title defense year, and Russ is coming in and there's been messages about him raising the vibes and the energy. Are you able to track kind of good and bad vibes throughout the season in a pattern where you're like, it's around the All-Star break, people are kind of down and ready for a break, and you're factoring all that in that context?
There's levels. There's like the team's in a slump right now. Team's not playing well. And then sometimes you'll talk to a reporter that covers a team and they'll be very honest with you and be like, they're in a bad place. Like, it's bad in the locker room. And that to me matters more. Now, I don't think you can quantify that. You can make manual adjustments if you're doing a power rating based off of that, I think, to a certain degree, but you got to be very cautious with it because they also turn very quickly. Like, a good example of this is if a team is just in a rotten place and everyone's unhappy and they've been on a long road trip and all of this, but then it's like, oh, they went out and they got pizza and they played laser tag. And that was really fun. And like, they just bonded. Like, literally, like, they're humans. Like, this stuff happens. If you're having a really crappy month at work or year at work, and then there's like a company get together and you get to know your office mates a little bit better, and you're just like, no, I feel like I know them better, and I feel like I like them. That's going to change. It's just going to change the productivity levels. It just will. And there's like a million studies on this. So you have to be very cautious with it, and you have to not make too much of an assumption. But I do think, if anything, it's like, for me, vibes are always a cautionary tale or a reason for optimism. They're not something to make hard adjustments off of because they are so ephemeral.
You can ascribe real or fake to these two players. I'm going to kind of group them together. Yeah. MPJ and Julian Strawther. We're going to hit on the math question later related to three-point shooting with the Nuggets. And these are two players who could provide more volume and a possible solution to that. I think fans have been frustrated with the team's maybe lack of involvement with MPJ for whatever reason. But it seems like he's having a pretty good showing so far. He showed up to training camp in good shape. He's mention his weight, 236 pounds, I believe he said. Julian Strawther has been pretty much right where he left off before the injury last season and is showing some progress, and he worked a ton this
I think he
offseason.
looks better.
Even
which
that,
he should now after another year in the NBA.
If MPJ was going to have a career year, let's say, what would be that like mark, and what would he have to hit?
Okay. I will just the question here is he's primed to have a career year, real or fake, and I'll say real. Everything that he's doing in these clips, he is sharper, he is smarter, he is more decisive. His handle is better, his decision making is quicker. He's not delaying.
Oh my God, the handle. That was
But that's the thing is like his handle used to be so bad. Like it was just like a real problem. He was completely out of control. And now he looks very much like he's in control to where he can actually challenge things. And that's making it to where he's getting better looks that are not so wild. He can make wild shots, but he doesn't need to take them all the time. And so we're seeing that a lot more. I still don't like his step back all that much. I still feel like he's fading too much on it. But he looks like an entirely different player. And what's funny is when I used to be like, they need to run some sets for him to get him used to doing these types of things. And the counter argument to that, and one of the things that I think, and Michael Malone has kind of said this in the pressers, is MPJ is helping himself because he's being decisive and making these things happen. Like, be the initiator, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, that's what he's doing. Is like he's actually taking the initiative and being like, I'm not going to wait for somebody to set me up. I'm not going to play passive. I am good enough now to be able to do this. And so, a lot of it is he was cast into a role because honestly, MPJ was not able to do those other things that people wanted to see him have the potential to do because the Nuggets saw in practice he wasn't ready for it. And now he is. Like, he's just looks leveled up in all of these things. It's not like, oh, he's bigger. So he's bigger and he's bigger and he's sharper and he's more in control and the handle's better and he's more decisive. And he looks like a 3-level scorer to me. And I think you got to get ready for a career year from MPJ because right now I'll say that he looks like the second best player on the Nuggets.
Real quick, if we want to go to Julian, the question was real or fake. Will he be in the playoff rotation? Because I think we all agree he'll be an NBA rotation player. How do you feel about the playoffs? It's super early right now, but
I will say, I'll say fake. And I that's not really about Julian. It's more about the question is, can you bench Russ or not? Like, do I think he should be in the rotation? Yes. Julian Strawther should be in the rotation. Russell Westbrook should not be in the playoff rotation. And that I don't love saying that because I like Russ a lot. But what's going to happen is that like Russ is going to get those playoff minutes and they're going to be bad and everyone's going to complain about him. And the math game will be an issue in the bench minutes and all of these kind of problems will pile up. Like, that's just very likely. If that is not the case, and I'm wrong on that, and Russ is both okay with, and Malone is empowered enough to be like, Russ, this is not your series. We need you next series. I need more spacing on the floor. And Julian plays next to Jamal, then I think that Julian will do just fine. I don't have worries about Julian being able to play in a playoff series. I really do think he can contribute and he is in control enough to be able to limit the damage of young player mistakes that he would provide, especially after another 6 months of being in the rotation. But with where we're at right now, I think we're at an 8-man rotation. Starters, Watson, Saric, Russ. That's where I think we're at right now.
Right, yeah. I mean, we had Pwat getting more minutes last season, didn't make the playoff rotation, or at least he was in it and then was out of it. So it can happen with, your second-year players who look promising and something, how Malone is, sometimes a shorter leash on some players. Now, especially with KCP gone and more room for CB and Strawther. So speaking of CB, Grace, what you want to set up this one?
Oh, okay. I wasn't ready for you to tee that up for me. I wanted to talk about Christian Braun's preseason. He's been kind of up and down. We saw some of his defensive upside in the couple of games in Abu Dhabi, saw some of what he might be able to do on offense. But the last 2 games in Denver, he's really struggled to, I think, find an offensive stride and look comfortable when he gets the ball. He seems like somebody who doesn't want the ball for the most part. And that's more troubling to me than if he was missing shots or whatever it is, because I'm worried about the level of aggression. And so my real or fake is whether his reticence to attack is something that's going to tank the starters' offense below the threshold that's needed to make this team a top team in the West, one of the top teams in the West.
I'll say fake, and the reason is because of the nature of the NBA season. So most guys don't look at the scouting report at all. The ones that do are going to look at it maybe the night before, usually either at shoot around sitting at their locker or before a game at their locker on the iPad, right? The question is just like, how often and how high will you can help off of Christian Brown get on the scouting report to where defenders are actively like, oh, this is the game plan. We want to help off of CB and bring help elsewhere. And I just don't think that will happen enough. I don't think CB is going to carry the shooting gravity that KCP did. That's why I hate that comparison of like, well, KCP only shot 4 threes per game. Yeah, because they defended him. And so with CB, like, that's not going to be the case. You're going to see guys definitely test him more. So like, will the starters offense be worse than last year? Yeah. Will it be worse than the year before? Yeah, it's going to be worse. Will the overall net impact be significant enough to tank them? No. So they'll be fine because Jokic, Murray, Gordon, and MPJ are good enough. If there is a point where this is like if I am not like, oh no, it's not nothing to worry about, they can manage it, then things have gone horribly, horribly wrong. Because your floor is just so high with Yoke. Like, it's just so freaking high. And that's not to say that I think that the players that he was with in the years without Murray and MPJ were horrible, because I don't think they were. I think they were pretty good offensive players, but still the overall spacing and things like that, Yoke still made it work and the offense was still killer. And so CB is a good enough defender for that to offset, and they'll be fine in terms of net rating. It'll be fine. If it's not, then it's like a complete disaster, and then there's going to be a lot of ripple effects from it. But for right now, even though I am decidedly lower on Christian than all of my colleagues in the media room as a starter, I want to be very clear on that. Not Christian as an NBA player or a long-term vet. I have reticence about him being in this starting role at this point in his career. That's it. Even despite that, I don't think he'll tank the offense.
Yeah, we don't really have another defensive guard in the case that Christian would get like played off the floor because of the offense. And so something that I've been thinking about a lot is like, wow, we could really use a two-way perimeter player who could, also like guard at a high level. Kind of gave that up this summer. But another one who's kind of been on the short list in my mind for, potentially playing some minutes with the starters, even though Malone hasn't really seemed to give it too much seriousness, is Peyton Watson, who we haven't gotten to see this preseason because of his hamstring injury. But he could shoot from 3, just like league average. Does that actually solve like 50% of our roster issues, real or fake?
I don't think it solves it, but God, it would help. I actually think that the 2-guard spot should be matchup dependent. I really think it should be, hey, we're facing a team with a very low offensive ceiling here. Let's have CB come in and just like absolutely lock them down, and then we'll win this game with like moderate offense. And then in different games, be like, we need like high switchability and playmaking defensively. Like, I think the Thunder are a matchup where like I want to see as much Peyton Watson as possible. I would love to see him in that kind of a starting position. But if he's able to shoot, then you now have your second unit in the minutes in which Jamal isn't running it. And even if he is, like, all right, if it's Jamal, Russ, Watson, I guess Hunter Tyson,
Or
and
Zeke.
Saric, right? Or Zeke. Now you have like spacing. You have 5-out spacing. And that's actually 5-out spacing. As well as if Peyton is playing in those stagger minutes at the end of the first and the end of the third, now you're able to really be like, okay, we can put Peyton in next to Nikola, space the floor out with 1 in 5 out or 1 in 4 out, and then we can put MPJ with the bench unit, and that's going to boost them up. Like, there's all these opportunities that him being able to play that role would provide. The Nuggets wouldn't take advantage of all of them because someone, I don't know who in the organization, whether it's coaching or front office or an agent, is just like, no, Jamal Murray gets the non-Jokic minutes. And I'm like, this is dumb. But there's all these other things that open up if Peyton's able to do that. I believe that the future for Peyton Watson is he's going to be a 3-level scorer. And that's just going to change fundamentally everything about him. He's just not in a great position to make that leap right now based off of the injury that he's having to deal with in preseason.
Not being able to play. Ryan Blackburn put out a tweet yesterday after that not devastating, but it was a bad loss to OKC yesterday, about what's your top concern coming out of that game. And mine still is that the AG extension hasn't happened yet. I sensed a shift in tone at Media Day from Calvin Booth with respect to the urgency that the team has to contend. He said things like, we are halfway through a 10-year window. We probably have an even greater appreciation of how hard it is to win. This was in response to questions about what happened last year. And we probably have 5 more single shots and every shot counts. Those were direct quotes from Media Day. And I want to know if that sense in tone that or that shift in tone that I sensed is real or fake.
Fake. Media Day was politics. And there's a reason that Malone and Booth did them independently. And the team will be like, no, it's just like a timing thing. And I'm like, okay. You've got Malone saying, we have enough shooters, not complaining about the roster. Like, we've got the guys. It's going to be hard, but we've got the guys as a see, I'm in line. Like, I'm not out here like criticizing the front office. And then you have Booth saying like, yeah, shooting's an issue. Like, we know that. And like, there's still stuff that we've got to do. And we've got an urgency as like I want to win. We all want to win. We want to win the title. Because, and also like Booth's fighting against the perception that he's so focused on the future that he's overlooking the now, right? So it's all like, that's all like a political structured in my opinion. That's not that I don't think that Calvin has like an urgency, because I think that there is like, no, we can win. But I think the difference is, do we need to win now? Yeah, but we also can win now. Like, we can win now and later. We can do this. We can do both. And that question is where the tension arises, is the idea of margins, and they're being shown to be a lot tighter, in part because of the CBA and decisions were made before then, but also like, look, decisions were made like giving Jalen Pickett a multi-year guaranteed deal. I want to be very clear, front offices get to make mistakes. Sam Presti is like far and away the best front office leader in the NBA. There is nobody close to me. It is not like there is a gap between everybody else and Presti. Presti whiffed on Gordon Hayward. Like, Trey Mann looks like he might be a 6 man of the year candidate in Charlotte. Whiffed on Gordon and admitted it. Was like, yeah, that was a huge mistake. I messed up. Like, that happens. Tim Connelly built a title winning team. You know what he did the first time that he tried to do that? He signed Nate Robinson and JJ Hickson as the quote unquote glue chemistry leadership guys. There were all these mistakes that front offices make. And it's okay for that. Like, Malone's made mistakes and he'll tell you all about them as long as the cameras aren't on. Like, there's all the kind of things that happen. And so I think that there is an urgency. And I think especially there's getting to be a little bit like, there's a lot of heat on everybody right now. The whole situation feels very much like the temperature's rising and hasn't burst into flame yet. And you're hoping that it doesn't reach the point where it does. But I don't think necessarily that the urgency that you felt is going to be conveyed or will result in a change in approach from the front office.
So, related to that and what I was saying about my concern, are the Nuggets going to go into the season without extending Aaron Gordon?
So I'm going to throw Ryan Blackburn under the bus right now. Ryan had been tweeting about the deadline for AG to get extended and like just came out with, hey, I want to clarify this. He can get extended anytime throughout the season.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And like, I hadn't double checked it because I trust Ryan.
I
so
need
I'm
to
just like
double check
throwing
that
Ryan
because I heard it from multiple sources. So I need to double check that.
Apparently, somebody in the Nuggets I would assume somebody in the Nuggets organization reached out to Ryan to be like, "Hey, by the way, I just continue to not be worried about it, and maybe this is foolish, and maybe they're going to let him go." There is just such a huge gap between KCP and Aaron Gordon, and I think the fan perception is that they were a little bit closer. It's like, well, you let KCP go, and he was really good and helped contribute to the title, and I'm like, Aaron was the piece. He was the cash in, and he has worked out so much better than anyone could have expected. And he has an incredible relationship with Nikola Jokic, who you kind of need to keep happy given how everything is going. The idea of them letting him go is such a tactical misstep that I am incredulous to the possibility. Does that mean that it's absolutely not going to then it will happen? No, because like I haven't asked the front office, hey, are you absolutely 100% going to get an extension with Aaron Gordon? Because they would never answer that because they'd be like, well, it all depends. Like they not. Never want to get boxed in. I will continue to believe that I'm not going to worry about an Aaron, and I would advise this very much. Don't worry about it until it's a thing. There's enough other things to worry about with Denver rather than what's going to happen this summer.
Right. The reason I bring it up is that after the title run, there was so much made about the fact that everyone had gotten paid. Everybody was rowing in the same direction. There weren't all the questions that we've had throughout this offseason about, like, are they going to re-sign KCP? Yes or no? The answer was no. Are they going to extend Jamal or not? Yes or no? And now the questions about AG, because all this stuff is just kind of coming up at the same time,
Right.
that I wonder, what that could mean in terms of affecting the season itself.
I'll just say this. If they let Aaron Gordon walk, I think the chances of Nikola Jokic not being on the Denver Nuggets in 3 seasons go up dramatically by over 20%.
Wow. Okay. You heard it here.
Better get it done.
First, folks. Let's move on to this because it is related to how the team has performed. Our next segment, I wanted to talk about the math game, which has been a very dangerous game for the Nuggets in their first 4 preseason games. It's been a dangerous game for them in the past as well. Every team is shooting a ridiculous number of threes versus Denver this preseason. And yesterday was, I think, their worst loss of the preseason against OKC. And OKC actually took the fewest threes of any team against them so far. Boston took 61 in the first game, 47 in the next. Phoenix took 50 threes against them in the game after that. And that has been prompting this conversation about, or sort of augmenting the existing conversation about the 3-point math with Denver, both in terms of their inability to take and make threes and their seeming inability to prevent teams from attempting threes. Are teams shooting more threes against Denver specifically, just as a way to play the math game against a team who usually wins the paint battle? Or are teams just shooting more threes in general?
There's a selection bias. They face the Celtics and the Thunder. They face the teams that are like, we're going to shoot a billion threes. We're going to play a very efficient game.
Well, the Thunder don't actually shoot that many threes. And they didn't take as many as they didn't last year. That's not a high frequency part of their game. They're not a top 10 3-point shooting team in terms of their shot diet, the Thunder. But
Right.
The Celtics definitely are.
So the Celtics definitely are, and the Suns are a Mike Budenholzer team.
Right.
Right. So that was the big question I had about them was, are they actually going to listen to Bud and take the advice and actually adjust this volume? And I asked Bud about it pregame, and he was very diplomatic about it. We're just trying to add to what's already great about this team, which is the right way to frame it. Like, that's such a smart way to frame it for players. I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to add to your game. That's something that players will be a lot more amenable to when they get into this. So OKC, you're right, is not a volume 3-point shooting team. They are a hyper efficient 3-point shooting team.
Yes.
I think it's likely that they're probably going to shoot more this season, but a lot of this is offset by just like preseason. So it's like selection bias. 2 of the 3 teams are going to be high volume 3-point shooting teams. I think Thunder will probably be higher than they were last season. And it's preseason. Those are, I think, are the things, because I don't believe any team is doing game scouting on these opponents. Because like Malone is like, well, I told them this, that, and the other. I'm like, they're not listening to you about the opponent. They don't care, right?
Well, I think the Nuggets might have over scouted Ryan Dunn because he's not supposed to shoot threes, and then he had like a career, like he shot and made more threes against us in one game than he did in his entire last year in college.
Let's say that a team has a game circled versus Denver. I think that will be part of the game script. I don't think it'll be part of the standard scouting report, because in part, like, this frustrates me, but it's true. Very few teams are ever like, change the way that you play for this opponent. I don't know that's going to be like a huge issue in the regular season, unless just like they just don't defend the 3-point line, which is where Malone's frustration is right now. Is he genuinely feels like they're just not defending, that they're just not paying attention to the scouting report, which is true, because I think it's preseason. And if they do that in the regular season, they're going to, like, it will be a problem. Like, these are the tendencies are the issues. When he's like, hey, Isaiah Joe is a 42% shooter and they're leaving him open, that's a problem, right? And so I don't think that teams that's like line one on the scouting report, but I do think that they will see it from time to time as a huge issue, lowering their win probability.
Malone actually, talked about how their, the ball containment is really bad on the perimeter, and that's what's, causing them to get in rotation. And I tend to agree with Malone because the scheme hasn't really changed. Jokic plays at the level, and last year they were actually second in opponent 3-point rate. So, adjusting for pace and all of that. In the year prior, they were 16th, which was not as good. But the reason I talk about opponent attempts is because I think that that's more important to Denver's success, just on a feeling. But Malone talks about 3-point defense in terms of limiting the other team's efficiency. Do you think that opponent 3-point efficiency or attempts are a more important defensive metric in the modern NBA?
Okay. So the analytics side is going to tell you that 3-point attempts is objectively the more important metric. And I am very rarely going to just like, no, it's not, to people that do this for a living, whether that's not only on the media side, but it's also on the team side. Like the team sides are like, yeah, it's just luck. It's just percentage is just luck. The difference, though, there's a intervening variable here, and this happens across sports, where there are certain teams that you will notice are continuously more quote unquote lucky year over year and you'll be like, why they were lucky this year and this year, and then like it never regresses. It's those intervening variables that you have to be on the lookout for. And the intervening variable in this is rhythm. You can contain 3-point attempts, but if you give up 25 great in rhythm threes, you are still going to be in a world of hurt. And if you give up not 60, that's bad. But if you give up 40 out of rhythm looks, it's still going to probably be okay. And so the determining factors here are like that, and it's impossible to quantify rhythm. You can get into openness, but there are lots of out of rhythm open shots in the NBA, and there's lots of in rhythm shots that are under contest. I asked for about 2 years, I asked every shooter I talked to, this is back in the day and I needed to start doing it again. I talked to every shooter that I interviewed. I asked them, would you rather shoot a wide open shot with a defender who is tall and long closing out on you? Or would you rather shoot with a smaller defender right beneath you? And every single player said they would rather shoot with a smaller player right beneath them, because if you're not in my line of sight, I don't see you, I'm knocking that down. Shane Battier was the exception to this rule. Shane Battier is like, no, the math says you want the open shot. This is not debatable. This is not a preference thing. You are going to make the shot more often if they're not underneath you. That rhythm question, I think, does matter. It matters by shooter too. And there's been a lot of studies of the Bucks in the title season were really good about allowing a high percentage of looks to the right shooters. That to me is like very dangerous and can get out of hand very quickly. That's where I start to be like, I don't know if this is like, I feel like you're so close to an extra rotation and giving it up to the wrong guy. So the answer here is, I don't think that the objective, all that matters is 3PA. I don't buy that. You don't want excess attempts, and you don't want high frequency of rhythm looks. You need some sort of metric for shot quality that is going to be almost entirely qualitative in order to get a more accurate measure on that, but that's going to depend on the analyzer. So it's a very tough question, and the answer here is don't allow a lot of in rhythm looks.
I'm surprised that you said the analytics people think that 3-point attempts matter so much, because I was surprised digging into the stats on this. 3 of the top 6 defenses, I was mostly looking at top 10, but when I noticed that these 3 top 6 defenses were actually bottom 5, that means that they allowed a ton of opponent 3-point attempts. That was OKC, the Pelicans, and the Heat. Talk about 3 teams that keep you out of rhythm. The Heat with the way that they defend, and obviously the Pelicans and OKC just with all of the length and rotations that they make to keep up their scheme.
Yeah, so there's 2 factors here. One is what I talked about under Bud, which is if you're able to target specifically, we want this guy to shoot. This is the guy you're going to leave open, and you're going to funnel the ball to him, and we're going to dare him to shoot. Because all defense really is, beyond turnover creation or playmaking at the rim, all it really is deciding which shots you're going to live with, right? And that's why drop is so effective, because you're basically saying we're going to live with pull-up jumpers off the dribble from point guards. Like that's what we're going to surrender, is we want to give up those kind of shots. And the OKC and Miami are both good at that. The other thing to keep in mind here, Houston's another team I would kind of mention on this, that there is like a basic effort level, how much effort you put into defense, how much pride you take in that. And what that translates to is you might generate a lot of 3-point looks that are under heavy contest from great closeouts. Now, great closeouts can be flybys that result in even better looks or drives for lobs.
I have a vendetta against
I know.
fly-by contests.
I know.
They are,
I know.
like, especially for, like, why are you doing a fly-by contest on Derek White?
Right. Right. But if it's conversely, if it's a guy that you absolutely know doesn't want to put the ball on the floor, there's probably some value to
Well,
it.
they'll sidestep and just shoot from
but
right there, or they'll fly in and just grab their offensive rebound.
But here's
off
a good
of
here's a good
miss.
here's a good question though. Let's take MPJ last year before he magically learned to dribble. If you did a flyby on him and he goes to that step back, do you feel like is that a worse percentage look?
Oh yeah,
he
he
will
would like
sidestep
sidestep.
sometimes.
He would sidestep, yeah.
And that's the thing, right? And so
Yeah.
like, these are like the little margins that can wind up mattering a lot. Look, there's bad flybys. I think then there are times when it's warranted to be like, especially depending on clock situation. This is why
Yeah.
it gets very, very, very complicated. Like a flyby with 12 seconds left on the clock, you're dead. You're dead.
You're out of the play.
You've already like you might as well just keep running back to get on offense. You might as well try and cherry pick because they're gonna score. But if it's 2 seconds left on the clock and you make that kind of desperation effort, that can definitely rattle it and cause a 24-second violation and cut off the chance of an O-reb. There are these teams, the Raptors were really good at this under Nurse. They were really good at allowing the right shooters to shoot. Again, I have some skepticism of that about your ability to do that. And the Bucks ran into this problem a lot with Miami, where it was like, that's one of the things that they've gotten hit with versus the Heat is, yeah, but if you have a coach smart enough to build in the counter mechanisms, all that means is you're going to try and prevent the shot and they're going to find ways to get the right shot. And your scheme is going to get all out of whack and they're still getting threes. There's a whole lot that goes into this. It's one of the reasons I think it's a lot more complicated than it's made out to be. It's why I don't like it's just luck. All that matters is 3PA. No. And I don't like if they don't make them, no, if you deal with volume, even a low percentage is going to kill you. So it's got to be this like very big balance between the things. I mean, that was one of the arguments we were having last night on Media Row is, look, the Nuggets don't need to shoot a lot of threes. They just need to not prevent or not allow a lot of threes. I'm like, I think it depends on the team and the situation. You're not going to get Boston to shoot 20 threes. It's not going to happen. They are not going to
Their floor is like 40.
Like, yeah, they're not going to let you. They're too good. They're not going to let you dictate that to them. So you better be able to hit enough to negate that advantage. And that to me is where it kind of gets into is I honestly think that instead of 3-point defense and 3-point offense, it's more that you should view those two things in concert and adjust accordingly based off of who you're facing.
That's a lot to do on a night-to-night basis.
The NBA is hard.
An 82-game season.
Yeah.
The other thing about the defense point on this math game, those three teams that allowed a lot of 3-point attempts from their opponent, OKC, the Pelicans, and Miami, they weren't great paint defenses last year, really, but they were great defenses. Like I said, 3 of the top 6, but they were also top 10, especially OKC was first in forcing turnovers, because the math game is not just about 3-point shooting. There's a lot that goes into, winning possessions. I just wanted to know, why do you think that Denver doesn't force more turnovers? You'd think because of the roster construction, we have all these big, long guys that should be, good defensively. It feels like they lean a little too hard into playing safe positional defense when I think maybe you need to be a little bit riskier.
The idea, and this is actually it's a Spurs concept. The Spurs were this way. One, they don't switch. They switch one. They do switch 1-4. I get that, but they are not going to switch the 1-5. They're going to play at level most of the time, or Jokic plays more drop than he used to. You are trying to contain the types of shots that you're allowing and not allow breaks in it. Denver, I think also because they're not a great transition team anymore. They were 2 years ago. They are not now. There's a real risk in that. But here's the biggest thing is just if you miss on a turnover drawing attempt, again, it's like that flyby. It's as bad as a flyby. If you gamble and you miss, the teams that gamble a lot are almost never good defenses. The teams that prevent the shots that they're trying to prevent and allow the shots they're trying to allow and then rebound well are great defenses. That's a very sustainable, successful model for defense. OKC has the luxury of having a million high performance athlete wings that can all switch and fly all over the floor. And I will also say, like, one of the big reasons why I don't think Denver forces a lot of turnovers is because Jokic is back the hell off of caring about defense. Like their blitzes are just not as good as they used to be. They used to be able to really hedge effectively and force those weak side ball rotations that you could snipe off in the corner. And they just don't do that as much. They just don't. They're not as good at it anymore. They don't care as much. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't think they create as many turnovers. Teams are just trying to attack them in, I think, different ways. And I think that positional defense also, I think, by inherently lowers the amount of turnover drawing opportunities that you're going to get. It's safer. Would it help? Sure. I think so. I think you could always be better at it. Individual deflections, but like Jokic caused a lot of deflections. AG's good at it. KCP was good at it. And like, that's going to be the key for, I think, Jamal and Christian Brown is like, they need to create a lot of deflections this season defensively in order to open up those kind of opportunities. And we'll see if they can do it.
I am a little bit worried about Russ's gambling on defense because I know that he wants to get a turnover and push the pace. So that'll be something to monitor.
Denver joins Boston, Houston, and Cleveland as these are all stats from last season, as the top 10 defenses that were all 15th or worse in opponent turnover percentage, especially Boston and Denver, who were bottom 10 in that regard. None of those teams are top 10 in pace. And so, there's like a chicken egg thing there. It's like, well, if you force more turnovers, maybe you'd be, a faster pace team, but teams that like to play slower, maybe they like to do the like bleeding the shot clock and, suck the life out of the game on defense that way, as opposed to high risk, high reward style that, say, the OKC Thunder play.
Dunks and threes has got defensive possession length, and Denver was like middle of the pack, 18th in that.
Okay.
In part, I think because with Denver, a lot of it's like either it was really good defensive possession or it was terrible. Like there's very much and last year was more good than it was more good than terrible. And in previous years, it was more terrible than good. And so that's always kind of the question I think with them is. Malone just, I think, is always going to want to clean up mistakes. If you have Jokic and you play, and this has actually been true, he's right. This is why the turnovers thing drives him so nuts. If you don't turn the ball over and you have Jokic, you're going to win. Their winning percentage is like 80% when they have fewer turnovers than their opponent and Jokic plays. Pretty easy formula. And Malone's always trying to get to the most direct path between A and B. I think ceiling matters for fans. I think it matters for analysts. But I don't think it matters for coaches because they're trying to avoid disaster. And that's part of the dynamic that you have to balance.
So the other half of the math game is obviously the offense. What are the kinds of threes that you think they need to attempt more? We talked about corner threes supposedly being this really high value shot, catch and shoot threes, pull up threes.
Off-screen threes is my answer to this. So a lot of the frustration and one of the reasons why I think the offense doesn't feel as explosive, even though it's still very good. But one of the reasons it doesn't feel as explosive, there were so many plays in that 2023 season, 2022, 2021, 2020, where Jokic would post up, the double would come, and he hits those whip around passes to the corner for wide open threes. Guess what? That's on the scouting report now. Like teams are just like, park your ass in the corner when we double. Do not allow him to get to that pass. And taking that away is a problem. The kind of counter there is like, if only there was some sort of person who was in charge of figuring out how to counter that, like a coach of some sort. And that's not like a shot at Malone, it's a shot at the staff. Is like, this team is still running the same stuff they always have. They need an injection of innovation. They need changes. They need more mechanisms. And I get that they don't want to risk messing up a good thing because they need to win games to try and win a championship. But there has to be this is like, in some ways, this is about the same stuff that the Calvin Booth Malone divide is about. What's the quickest line between A and B? Run the same stuff. What's the best line between A and B? You need more offensive ingenuity. They need more sequences where guys are coming off pin downs, off ball to get motion. There is so little movement now off ball for a team that used to, like, they'll cut and they'll run sequences to force teams into bad positions and create open layups. They need to do a little bit of that to create open threes. They just need to generate a few more of those kind of opportunities. And yeah, like a layup's great, but you need to also be able to generate some 3-point looks as well. And I just see two guys parked on the other side waiting, and the other side either running 2-man game to try and force the defense in to hit those guys or other sequences. Like the league is just used to them now. And again, they still have a great offense. So like the coaches would be like, what are you complaining about? Like, why are we complaining about the offense? Look how good we are at offense. I get it. But the offensive ceiling and their ability to compete with these teams from a math perspective has to be balanced out by quality looks coming off of movement. And they have neither the personnel nor the plays to do that right now, which I think is an issue.
I actually think that Julian Strother provides some potential to do exactly that. And we've seen it throughout Summer League, throughout the preseason. We saw it from him last year in his rookie season as well, and how he appears to be very comfortable operating within these movement sets.
Yeah, I would love to do that. To have I think he should be definitely running Julian off pin downs. Get him used to it with the second unit. Run a Sarge off ball screen with him and force them into making that. If they're going to try and switch it, okay, then you run that into another screen with Julian and then get the big on Westbrook, right? Like there's all these mechanisms that you can run in order to take advantage of that, depending on the defensive coverage. And Sarge, I think, provides a big advantage in terms of being another shooter who can also slip to a spot of three. Zeke, if he's going to be actually playable, provides that as well. So I think there's a lot of mechanisms here. But yeah, I think Julian is maybe the best weapon that they might have on roster as far as an off-ball mover to create open threes outside of Jamal, who I don't know wants to do that.
I think I disagree with you that they haven't been running a lot of off-ball stuff to generate threes. It's just a lot of above the break and wing threes, not so much to generate corner threes. And oftentimes what ends up happening, because they try to run a lot of their same sets for like every player on the roster basically, is you end up with a player like Christian on the wing, like hesitating to like take the shot because like, I was hoping the defense would do something different here so that I could pass it. But, you know, even throughout the preseason, we've seen some of that stuff, like I said, run for Julian, run for MPJ as well. And he's looking a lot more ready to take better advantage of those opportunities.
Denver was 6th last season percentage of time spent on off-ball screen possessions via synergy, which is like these margins are very narrow on all these, but it does kind of support your idea that they did generate a fair amount of those possessions, and they were really good at them, generating 1.065 points per possession on those situations. They shot 45% with a 55% EFG. Like that all grades out really well. I will also say I think it's hard to generate corner threes out of off-ball movement because you wind up getting crowded. Like I just think you run out of space. Yeah. Like then there's a higher probability of turnover there, either by stepping out of bounds or the ball being placed into a spot where you're trying to catch it and you go out of bounds.
So, I also think when Strother was playing, Malone wanted to run those pin downs for him and run him off screens a lot. Like he just inherently is a player that a coach is going to gravitate to that. And I don't know, I feel like it's just an eye test thing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, like you just read the stats, but I feel like fans wanted way more of that with MPJ.
I think that they ran it a lot with MPJ, but he wasn't quick enough to generate the separation fully, and so the play would end up resetting once he got the ball because it was easier to defend than it has been through what we've seen in this preseason.
Yeah, I agree with that.
No, I agree with that too. That's a perfect explanation.
Oh, okay. I was going to say you can disagree with me.
No, I think like he has something to work on with that, and I think he's looking good, and I think they're going to do that more. I think, like Matt was saying, the coaches know they need to be way more like intentional about their sets, and even Jamal said, like we talked about this against the Wolves, was saying, we're too random out there. We need more organization, and I think that they trust each other so much, just their chemistry, the natural chemistry, and I think there needs to be a little more direction on the coaching staff side too.
So with respect to corner threes, catch and shoot threes, and pull-up threes, Denver got worse between the title year and last season in both attempts and efficiency in all three of those categories. Malone has even said it is the best way to get open threes is in transition. They actually had 97 possessions per game, which was a full almost possession and a half less than in the title years. They're like the only team in the NBA that got actively slower as the NBA got faster, just in raw terms. Is this just a case of needing to push the pace more?
I don't agree. I don't think so. And the reason I don't agree with that assessment is what kind of threes are you generating? Do I like the idea?
Christian Brown transition above the break.
Pull up threes? Yeah.
Pull up threes, yeah.
So like that's the kind of thing is like if you say we want to push the pace and shoot threes, you will wind up with a lot of Puget threes, pull up jumpers and transition threes. Like,
well, what about taking more advantage of semi-transition
Sure.
to get into your sets faster and just
there's two things. There's transition and there's
Right.
tempo, right?
Sure.
Getting into your sets quicker is absolutely what Denver should do. Denver should be getting into their sets always by 16, 17 seconds. First action, not bringing the ball over the court. It should be first action, first screen set, first trigger, first cut needs to be at 16, 17 seconds. Pressure that defense and make them make multiple rotations with the best passer in the NBA, the best playmaker, and this team that is so smart and presents so many problems. Make them defend that for 16 full seconds every single possession, and you'll win. Like, you just will. You'll win. Letting them off, not initiating until 12 seconds, is letting them off the hook.
Yeah.
It makes it easier. Don't do that. Do I love the idea of Russ pushing the pace and kicking to a wide open Michael Porter Jr. in the corner, like was such a big thing in the title year? Absolutely. Those are great looks. Michael Porter Jr., Julian Strother spacing to the wings and shooting pull-up threes. Would love to see Jamal do a little bit of that. Right?
Yeah.
Like, would love to see Jamal. Would love to see Jamal shoot a catch and shoot three every now and again. And so those are the kind of shots that I would want. But when you're talking about just like as a broad term transition, and I don't think, Malone would argue. He'd be like, well, I'm not telling him to shoot bad threes, Matt. But I do find that if you tell players as a talking point, hey, we want more transition threes, they're going to be like, okay, cool. And that's not what you want. They have so much offensive talent. You do need to be deliberate with the shots that you take. This is not an expansion year of trying to work on your game and develop that into a weapon. And it's a bad weapon to have anyway. It's not a high percentage look. So I think that tempo would be great? Yes. Tempo, absolutely. Tempo, earlier shot clock threes, 100%. Pressure the defense, create open looks. But that's got to be balanced with making sure create open looks.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with that. And that was sort of my defense of the Nuggets pace last season, because it was like, well, the half court, they were just scoring most nights, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, against certain matchups, there are advantages to just trying to catch these really stout defenses off guard. One of the other things I noticed when I was looking through all of these different, comparisons between the title year and last season, the Nuggets went from 3rd to 19th in rim efficiency. That's 62.7% at the rim last season and 66.5% in the title year. That's like a massive drop as a team. And I know you've talked about how that title year in particular, the season that Jokic did not win MVP, he was like ridiculous at all levels, including his at rim efficiency, which took a serious dip last season. So that's definitely a part of that number, considering he's the player who probably takes the most shots at the rim of anybody at the team. And I wonder if part of helping this offense out is just doubling down on what makes him good, which is scoring in the paint. Christian should be better at finishing at the rim than KCP, but they were the same last season. He took a 10% dip in his rim efficiency between his rookie year and last year. Reggie to Russ is that might actually be a decline just because of Russ's inefficiency at the rim. Like, neither of them were good. Yeah, and I already mentioned Jokic's rim finishing. So what do you think about that question and just like efficiency at those high value shots?
So I don't find that the Nuggets, from a mid-range perspective, depending on where Jamal's at, like, I don't love the idea of them being like, yeah, we're a mid-range team. I don't think that's a good idea ever. But I don't think that's a good idea for almost any team. The Suns underperformed because they didn't take enough threes. It's not like you don't want to generate shots at the rim, right? You always want, like, that's the best shot because of the conversion rate. You need a bounce back year from Yoke. I will say I worry about this from the perspective of, like, I feel like Christian's going to take a higher volume of shots at the rim than KCP did, because KCP was willing to take the DHO pull-up free throw line jumper, which he was pretty good at. And I feel like Christian is not in a place to do that. So he's going to keep trying to drive to the rim and quote unquote be aggressive, which is going to result in fouls, which he's then going to miss the free throws on.
Well, he'll make one of them.
Yeah. And so that is where I think, like, you will start to run into some serious problems. Jamal being more of a finisher, less of a desperation tough shot maker, probably a good idea. This to me though goes back to, hey, you need some ingenuity, you need some new stuff, because I think that they've got most of your stuff scouted. Some of it's not even like scouted. It's more that they've played against it so much they've started to anticipate it. This is a problem in the playoff series. If you notice in the Wolves series, like the first game you're really caught off guard by everything, and then by the 7th game you're like, I know exactly the timing on this sequence. It's why game 7s are so phenomenally ugly all the time. And so I just think that they need more ingenuity to create high quality looks. One of the things I actually do kind of like is, yes, Russ's inefficiency at the rim is a problem. What's Russ's inefficiency going to look like off Jokic passes? Because Russ has been a more willing cutter than he has been in the last couple of years. And if he actually takes that to heart, like we saw in that lob in the inverted pick and roll for the dunk in the third preseason game, he's got a lot of opportunity there. So I think there's all these sort of ways, but they have to invest in these kind of mechanisms in order to get, again, good looks at the rim and not just like heavily contested, trying to throw it up in between 5 people looks. Jokic has just got to shoot better at the rim, period. He just has to. Like, he's expected to, because that's how good he is. And it's not fair because no one should be as good as he is, but that's the expectation.
Okay, so the last thing that I had on the offense here with the math game is actually going back to media day and Calvin's media day comments. He said, quote, "We are riding a fine line," right? This was in contrast to what you mentioned before about Malone being like, nope, the roster's fine. All good. I'm a team player. Like, we're going to be good. The shooting in particular was the only thing that he went like that far in sort of citing that concern. So I'm actually wondering if that's something that they might actually do at the trade deadline. What position that's like guard, big, wing, do you think getting another like shooter / competent, someone who can do something with the ball would help the most on this roster?
Big, absolutely big, 100% big. The drop off from Yoke to the non-Yoke minutes, I think, is a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. And they make it out to be just about talent. Oh, the bench players are all awful, and they're letting them down because with these awful players. And I'm like, there's something about the way that the Nuggets play where it makes it difficult for them to adapt without Nikola. And you need some sort of facsimile. And I think they're hoping for Dario to be that. My question is about Dario's durability and the rebounding side. If you are able to find a competent backup 5 who can also operate out of the pinch post and shoot a little bit, and if you're like, that sounds like a dream player, that sounds like Nikola Jokic. I'm not asking for like I'm not asking for a 40% 3-point shooter, and I'm not asking for a 7 assists per game guy. I'm talking about has the capability to do it. I've been screaming for Kelly Olynyk since the beginning of time, and I will continue to scream about it. He is the perfect fit for that second unit. He would be absolutely awesome in that role. It would give Westbrook, I think, a better pick and roll partner, because Dario will do like I said this last night into Media Row. It's like Dario's going to do the job and not complain. Hey, you're a 5 now. Okay, we'll do. No problem. Like, he'll do it. But is Dario Saric like the ideal stretch 5? No, he's not. He's like an ideal stretch 4. So the ability to be able to generate, especially given how many teams are going to double big now, like the idea that this is still like a small ball league is outdated.
Oh, yeah. Everybody got bigger. All the centers got paid big bucks this summer. And I'm like, oh, what the hell? None of these guys are gettable on a minimum anymore.
Yeah. And so you got to be able to kind of generate these kind of things. And there'll be drawbacks to anybody that they would get. But, Zeke is still, and this was a touchy point last night with Malone, but he is still better suited as a 4. I think Saric is totally fine as a 5. I just think it's like, would it be better if you had somebody who was bigger and could screen for Russ? Yeah, I just think that would be better. I think it'd be great to have both options, to be like, hey, we can't play this center because they're going to put him in pick and roll and destroy him. We need Dario's ability to switch. Okay, we'll go to that. Hey, we need somebody who can actually get a rebound and can be able to.
Did you just say Dario's ability to switch?
Yeah.
Like now at this stage in his career?
Okay, so there's a difference between the reason so many teams want to switch is it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's just easier. Are they going to attack Dario? 100%. Are they going to have to help off? 100%. Are they going to lose that battle sometimes? Yes. That's why Dario's not a starter. But if you like, can Dario? It's a degrees question.
Yeah.
Can Dario switch more than DeAndre?
Yeah.
Right. Or if they were to get, Olynyk, Alex Len, Frank Kaminsky, any of those options, and I know it's like, those guys. This is what you're talking about. This is what you have room for on the roster. You're not trading for Jakob Poeltl. You're not trading for Mitchell Robinson. You're not trading
or
for
even
Goga
Kelly
Bitadze.
Olynyk. Yeah, or Koga Batase.
Yeah, you're not trading for those guys. So like you're going to have to deal with it with this level of play. But if you're able to get somebody who provides you an alternative to Dario with also some redundancy, that to me would help, I think, the most with adding it. Now, their perspective is going to be who can I actually play in a playoff series? And that I'm just like, who are you going to get with your assets at the deadline who is going to be able to play in the playoff, like is good enough to in the playoff rotation? Like as like an indicator here, Buddy Hield was unplayable in the playoff series.
He was, and I was like, what happened to him? I don't even know why. He was playing just fine for Indiana leading up to that trade.
Right?
It's like he forgot to learn how he forgot how to play basketball just at the trade deadline. Yeah.
And so
up until Game 6 against the Knicks.
Right. And like, so this is the thing. And so I just think that like any move that they make will have to be very much on the margins. And so if you're going to do that, I would rather do it at big where it's like, hey, this could help Russ. This could help the spacing. This could help the screening, and it could help the rebounding. So that's why I would say big.
That's really good reasoning. So I was thinking about the thinness at guard, but it's that's more something I wish they'd address immediately. But I understand
the guard thing you're just going to have to accept is just like that their fate was sealed when they signed Jalen Pickett to a multi-year guarantee deal.
When they signed both Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson to multi-year deals.
But on the guard front in particular.
Sure.
Because
but you'd have another roster spot.
The natural thing is for him to be on a standard second round pick contract and be like, hey, it didn't work out. You know, we'd love to have you in the G League. We still want to work with you. This is not, but we got to let you go. And then go find insert bet here. An unnamed media member and I were in the room being like, why is DSJ out there? Why is Dennis Smith Jr. just out there? Nobody signed him. Nobody's got him. If you just had Dennis Smith Jr. as your third backup emergency point guard, it would remove this gigantic question mark. Because that's the thing with me last night. It was a tough matchup with the Thunder, but it's also like, so you're telling me if Jamal sprains an ankle and Russ has got knee soreness, this is what you're left with. And that's a huge problem. That removes your ability to sneak out a game versus a lot of teams.
All right, let's move on to our mailbag. So all of these questions are geared toward how good the Nuggets are relative to the rest of the West. Everybody wants to know where they stand, both in the regular season and in the title race. But a lot of these are more focused on the regular season because everybody is in the fandom right now is worried from day one. Like, what are they even going to look like out of the gate? And this preseason has done nothing to assuage them of those doubts. I've heard you and Adam Mares talk a lot about how the Nuggets tend to outperform their win totals, those in the betting markets. And you've talked about how they outperform their point differential. So just like points scored minus points allowed. This one isn't controlled for pace, but think about it as like the net rating. Last year, they actually had a substantially better net rating than the championship year. So last year they were plus 5.4 and the championship year plus 2.3. This is all numbers I'm getting from Dunks and Threes for anybody who wants to look it up. Where do your models have the Nuggets power rated right now? What does that mean for what you think their point differential is going to be? And what was it that you got wrong about them last year? Because you went so far as to suggest that they would win less than 50 games last season.
Yep.
So I want to know, what did you get wrong in your analysis of the team heading into last season?
I made some adjustments on the power rating, which I think is going to make it a little bit more stable this year. And I'm excited for that. I think it's a little bit more accurate. Their clutch time numbers don't really show how good they are in those crunch time situations where they're just like an elite team in closing out games. I think I also gave a little bit too much credence to some of the, like, their ability to win the they destroyed the bad teams. Like the Nuggets had so few games where they screwed around and missed one. Like they just dominated.
It was just the Jazz were the only below 500 team that they lost to last year.
No, that's the thing is like, I thought so too, because it doesn't feel like that, because I think fans always remember the teams where it's like
when they go down 20 to the Hornets
right,
and then have to come back.
And then have to come back. But if you look at the end of the season, ESPN's got this. The Denver Nuggets went 28-2 versus teams under 500 last season.
Oh, it was the Jazz, and I blocked out the Spurs game at the end of the season. That was the other one.
Yeah.
PTSD. My bad.
So they're really good in all those areas. I think that there is something ephemeral about their ability to overcome some of their deficiencies and balance it out. Where it's like if they have a really bad transition night, I think they compensate with a really good half court night, and vice versa. Even though transition wasn't a strength last season, but a lot of it, I will honestly just say, is like I don't think they were as good as the record. I still don't. I don't think they were as good as 57 wins. Now, does that mean that my prediction of under 50 was right? No, it was wrong. I should have been like, I should have looked for or given a manual adjustment, because this is what a lot of this is like I do give manual adjustment, and just been like, Jokic is worth 50. Like Jokic with a decent cast is going to win 50 games, which is where I have them schedule neutral projected at currently, based off of where they're at. I have them at 50.5. I'm trying hard to resist the panic on that one. Currently in the Western Conference, I've got the Thunder 1, I've got the Wolves 2, I have the Mavericks 3, I have the Suns 4, and then I have Denver in an effective tie with the Grizzlies and Pelicans for 5th. I do feel confident about them finishing below those top 4. With normal injuries for all those teams, I have them finishing behind OKC, Dallas, Minnesota, and the Suns. Grizzlies is a lot more variable, and Pelicans is extremely variable, and I don't like my number on New Orleans at all.
I have no idea what's going on at the Pelicans.
Here's why. Is that part of how I come up with this is judging, all right, who did you lose? Who did you add? Let's take last year's numbers of how you performed, and let's just do a neutral observation of, on paper, who you got and lost. And the numbers that I use are like, oh yeah, no, DeJounte Murray is really good. He's really good. He's really helpful. Like DeJounte Murray is worth 7 wins according to the numbers, and that's like not as high as it sounds. It's like a pretty reasonable.
No, that sounds like a lot of wins, because I know like Jokic is like 17.
Yeah,
was his win shares for last season.
But the difference is just like there's like a cap on the ceiling, and this is just like, hey, most really good players are in that 7 range, and you could be like, DeJounte Murray's not really good. Okay, fair enough, but the numbers I'm working off don't. So like, I'm at the point of downgrading.
But they lost Dyson and Najee.
Yeah,
and
but that's the problem, is like the numbers I'm using are kind of like, eh. And I actually kind of agree with it. I think the Dyson is one of those guys that NBA Twitter loves, and I love Dyson. How do you not love Dyson? He's great. Like, he's so much fun.
He's kind of like Christian with the ball sometimes. So.
And it's just like, how much is he actually going to impact? Like, how much is he actually going to impact the game outcome? Is he going to help? Absolutely. Is he a helpful player? 100%. Right. Larry Nance has lots of injury.
Those guys are off the bench. So.
Yeah, and Larry Nance has lots of injury issues.
Oh, right. And Larry Nance, that's true. That's a lot. Like, they changed a lot.
Yeah. And so, but that's the thing, is like Larry Nance was also injured most of the time. And so it's like, when you look at now, the problem with this is like, a lot of these numbers I'm also focusing on, guess what? Zion's a huge positive, not because of his offense, but because of his defense last season. Do I think that continues? Probably not. So like, my outcome here is like, I think Denver has the definitive edge for the 5th seed. I think 5th is probably where, if you were like, okay, regardless of power rating, give me a slot for the Nuggets, I would definitely be like, I think 5 is where they wind up.
Just like definite, like not 5 or higher, just 5.
No higher than 3rd.
Okay.
No lower than 6th.
This is related to our first mailbag question from Beaston258, or Owen on Twitter, who asks, what do the Nuggets need to do to reestablish themselves as a top shelf contender? And I'll just pair that with this question of, what is the gap in terms of like a player between the Nuggets and OKC? And can a jump, step, leap, a hop, a skip from any of our young guys make up that gap?
No. Now, look, I have maintained a pretty solid position on this, which is, I think the Nuggets are likely to underperform in the regular season, and everyone's going to be out on them, and it's going to be a perfect buy low opportunity, because I think by the end of the season, they're going to be better than they are right now. Let's hope so. But once you get into the postseason, it is about matchups and path and luck. And if Denver is healthy going into the playoffs, and they are better than they are now, and they get the right series of matchups, they can absolutely win the NBA title. Because I do know how much of a solve breaker Jokic is. And I know how good Aaron is. And I know how good MPJ is. And I know how good Jamal normally is. And I know how good Malone is. Malone's a really good playoff coach. He just is. And so, like, there's a lot of reasons to think that they'll get in there. I think they can make a run once they get in the tournament. But as an example of this, like, I have them power rated right now, and power rating is, if you're wondering the difference in a rating and a ranking, a ranking is just like, hey, I think they're the third best versus the fourth best. A rating is how much are you favored by versus an average opponent on neutral court. I have the Nuggets 3.5 right now, which is pretty strong. Like, they're a very good team. That puts them on pace for 51 wins. That's pretty good. I have the Oklahoma City Thunder at 8.6. They got to make up 5 points in power rate. Now, by like the end of December, this could be like the Thunder are plus 5.5 because they're not as good as expected, and Denver's plus 4.5. It's only a point. And then you're like, okay, if you can make a major move, you could add this, but you got to have somebody that's going to make an actual 1 point per game difference in your overall power rating, and that's a lot. So for me, it's like there's no way for them to really catch them from where we're at right now. But I do think that this number at 3.5 is based off of where they finished last season and losing KCP. If Christian levels up, let's say Christian is way better, and that's worth 1.5 to their power rating, and they're at 5. Okay,
1.5. Wow.
It's not, remember, but that gets them past Phoenix. They would now be favored past Phoenix. Let's say not even just Christian. Let's say Christian, Julian, and Peyton, that their combined internal improvement gets them, and they're 1.5 better than I've gotten projected right now. Now they're better than Phoenix. Now they're a top 4 seed. So like there's all these paths to get there. And also this is just a projection. It's not something that I'm like, oh, it's absolutely hard and fast. This is just like based off of the things that I value and how I use these things to project forward. This is where I've got them because I found that I do better having some sort of number to work off of rather than when I was just like, yeah, they're better than this one and that one's better than this one, but also the other one. It's just an attempt to kind of quantify things in a more solid way.
Yeah, I think the Thunder are going to be pretty much impossible for the Nuggets to catch at this point in the regular season. But to your point, it is a matchup game when it comes to the playoffs, so right. There's always a chance. Relatedly, we had a question about the Nuggets and the Thunder from Andrew Boley, who asked how many Nuggets would get playing time if they were on the Thunder.
Okay. I think Jokic would play. I'm pretty sure. Aaron Gordon is probably not playing over Chet because of Chet's shot blocking and floor spacing.
If AG were on the Thunder, they just might not have gotten Hartenstein.
Right. They'd be playing Chet and AG. AG plays for the Thunder 100%. MPJ plays for the Thunder 100%. Jamal plays for the Thunder 100% as a 6 man. Sorry, but like if you have Shea and you have...
Well, we saw how he and Shea plays together with Team Canada, so
yeah, it'd be good to separate them.
And I'm sure like Jamal would find that insulting.
It's all about winning.
And I'm not trying to insult Jamal there. If you're talking about like the Thunder are going to play the 5 best players in terms of two guards, 2 wings, and a big, then Jamal probably starts. It's probably Shea and Jamal. So got MPJ's on there. So that's the big 4 all play for the Thunder. Why do you need Christian if you have Lou Dort and Casey Wallace and Alex Caruso?
Yeah.
Like I'd rather have Casey Wallace than Christian right now. So I don't think Christian gets time. Russ does, because the Thunder love him and will always love him, and he will always have a home there. That organization still has nothing but great things to say about him. They've never said anything, and they've never said anything bad about KD either. They still say great things about KD. But Russ plays. Saric, no. Saric probably doesn't. You'd probably rather have Jalen Williams. But
I'd love to have big Jalen Williams on this team, by the way.
Yep, would be a good fit. And then Julian doesn't. Again, it's like, would you rather have Peyton Watson or would you rather have, like, I know that Aaron Wiggins is going to shoot 42% from 3?
Right.
Yeah, based on the roster makeup. Yeah.
They might have dusted him off for the playoffs, though. I don't know, like Peyton Watson or Ousmane Dieng.
Oh yeah. No, Peyton for sure. Peyton for sure. Like that's one. Just the whole problem is just like the Thunder have like a million Peytons that can all shoot. They're not as athletic as he is, but
they can shoot.
Yeah.
You know what you're gonna get from them.
Yep.
All right. Well, we just heard your power ratings, but we had another question from Mile High Aki about the defense of these top Western teams. Where would you rank them defensively?
Minnesota 1, Oklahoma City 2, Denver, Phoenix, and Dallas are all in a tie for me. I'm not trying to cop out. I'm not trying to cop out on the question, but it's like, if you tell me like what level of effort am I getting from Yoke? Am I getting 2023 effort or 2024 effort? If I'm getting 2023 effort from Yoke, then I'll give the Nuggets the edge. Budenholzer's going to do good work with the Suns because his scheme is something they all like. Players love Bud because he's just going to make it simple for them. There's going to be nothing complicated. It's not going to be you're not going to have to overly work. It's a standard NBA scheme that is proven and has a track record and gets them by. And so like their defense will probably be better than expected because Budenholzer is really good about taking parts and making it work. So that Phoenix defense, I think, will be pretty good. Dallas is really interesting because it's like, look, do I think that they got objectively better pieces than last year? Like Najee Marshall is better than Derrick Jones Jr. He just is. Klay Thompson's better than Tim Hardaway Jr., which is the actual comp that you should use and not the flip side of that reverse.
Yes, I agree. Except now Klay is starting.
Yeah, and Klay's going to start for now, and he's going to probably close games for now. But they also
he's going to be playing way more minutes than Tim Hardaway Jr.
They did love playing Tim Hardaway Jr. a lot, though.
Yeah, that's true.
And Quentin Grimes is good too. And am I worried about Luka and like Luka, Kyrie, Klay as a top three? Am I worried about the defense? 100%. But one of the things that they figured out last year is, hey, if we just have like really great rim protectors, and also as another sign, I asked Malone this question last night, and Rick Carlisle had talked about it too. We're seeing the post All-Star officiating, and that is the dirty secret of the Dallas defense is that they fouled everyone after All-Star and got away with it.
Not a secret to us.
And so that's going to make up for a lot of this is like, yeah, Luka's terrible, but guess what? He just gets to foul now. So it's fine. So yeah, I think
that's better than just letting guys blow by him. My question is which is he going to do at least to start the season?
Yeah. And the other thing with Denver is the defensive rebounding concerns, I think, are real. They were not good in those categories last year. It's a concern for Malone now. And the bench is going to be, I'm really worried about their defensive rebounding in the second unit without DJ. I'm just very worried in those minutes without DJ that they're going to be destroyed on the glass.
Well, maybe it'll help when Peyton is playing at small forward.
Maybe. It would actually help more if MPJ staggered with the bench.
I agree. I think it should be MPJ and Peyton. I think they could use his spacing as well. All right. My question here, we were talking about the Will and I were talking about this when the schedule first came out. And how, all these different websites like Tankathon and Positive Residual set these strength of schedule ratings for winning, for teams. And, there's one question about whether fans should care about strength of schedule when it comes to just like setting a winning expectation for your team, or if you should just be like, no, we have a good team. They should win every game. And it doesn't matter like what stretch of the season you're in or this or that.
Okay, so it depends on the SOS model. Some of the SOSs are built on adjusting on the fly, and some of them are preseason expectation. I'm not sure what positive residuals is. I think it's preseason win total, but that's like largely what it's actually been proven kind of be the best way to do it is like just take the win total of these teams. Don't take the prior season wins. Take whatever they're expected to win this year. It's a market expectation that's adjusted for opinion from people betting, and it's a really good way to actually get an estimation of it. And there's different numbers on there. Tankathons is really good for showing you the current, hey, like by mid-season, this is like what you've got the rest of the way from where they're at this season, like how good they are now. It does kind of depend on, you need to look at each site, you need to evaluate what it says about the SOS model before you kind of go off of it.
So some of them you're saying are just they pick like the strength of the teams that you're facing is based on something that happens that like the rating preseason, and it doesn't change. So for example, last year when the Grizzlies caught on fire, the strength of schedule for the teams that were facing, right? They spontaneously combusted in the bad way. That was not revised, but some models you're saying do revise throughout the season, where you're this team's not as good as we thought they'd be, or
they'll either do like a half and half where it's like, hey, they were expected to be this good, but they've only won this many games, and so here's like the expectation. Or they'll do just like we shift from a preseason number to this is actually where these teams are at, and this is the SOS model. So I would refer it by site.
Related to that, positive residual, we had a specific conversation about me and Will, where we were wondering if positive residual overweights altitude because of. But my question was actually whether we undervalue the impact of altitude for the Nuggets' home court advantage.
Okay, so the answer to that is historically you underrate them. You underrate it.
Okay.
Currently, it overvalues it.
Okay.
So the way that works is historically Denver's home court advantage, particularly in regular season, was absolutely massive. It was an incredible inefficiency. And over time, as we've gotten into more modern era, there's been more and more of an adjustment on that in those ratings based off of that, and that's going to creep into the market. Like the market no longer, the market accounts for Denver's going to be X amount of points better at home. But the other concurrent trend that we see, which is actually really fascinating to me, in both NFL, MLB, NHL, and NBA, we've seen a marked decrease in strength or in home court advantage or home field or home ice advantage over the last 10 seasons. It is drastically lower. For example, the old NFL marking would be like, oh, you get 3 points for home and it switches 3 points if you're away. So it's a 6-point swing. It's down to 1.8 or less, where it's such a drastic reduction in how much it is. And we see this in NBA too, where it used to be like if you were on the road, you were way lower. And that has been drastically reduced. Not only, what's interesting is it's not just against the spread numbers, it's also factoring in just point differential. Road teams win more than they used to. And my logic for that, which isn't proven, is teams have invested so much more in finding ways to advance and prepare their guys better that they're aware of these things and they're doing things to counterbalancing it, changing schedule arrival times, like the Lakers getting into town a full 5 days before game 1 to make sure that they're acclimated for
if they're not coming straight from the play-in.
Right. So like these types of adjustments are what manage to kind of offset that. But that's kind of one of the things. Positive residual, I think you have to objectively, because Utah and Denver are always at the top no matter who they face. Their schedules are always going to be advantageous. At the same time, you ask any player at the end of here's the best example I actually have of this is anecdotal. And it's Al Horford is one of the most gracious human beings you will ever meet in the NBA. He's gracious with his time. He's courteous. He gives thoughtful answers. Al's the best. Nobody ever has anything bad to say about Al. Al blew me off for an interview because literally he told the PR team, the end of a road trip in Denver, I just can't do it. That's so many times these teams at the end of a road trip in Denver are just miserable. It is a real impact, but it's probably overstated in positive residuals SOS rankings.
I just wanted to share a stat on that because you talked about the Jazz being at the top. That's the thing that kind of set off my antennas there. It's like, the Jazz? What? But I was listening to the Dunker Spot yesterday, and Steve Jones, friend of the pod, was talking about how the Utah Jazz in his lifetime have only had a losing record twice. That was from 2013-2014 season and 2004-2005. Regardless of the quality of the team, or losing record at home, I should say. Yeah. So I that's what prompted my thought that maybe we're like actually undervaluing the altitude there. But like you said, the value of home court has definitely been diminishing. We saw that in the playoffs a ton this past year, where it's like, oh, teams are just getting like blown out at home in some instances. And we had round 2 game 7s where the home team lost for lots of reasons, but just saying like you're not safe at home anymore.
Utah last season had, by my metrics, the best home court advantage relative to it. So their difference was they were 6.6 better in net rating, home versus away.
Yeah. I think it was the offense in particular that jumped up for them when they were at home.
They were 3.8 points better in offensive rating at home versus away. Versus if you take just the difference between like the league average, they were 5 points better at home in net rating than the league average, which was only they were 2 points better. Teams like home court last season was about 2.1 points per game.
Let's go to our next question. Yeah, how do back-to-backs compare in difficulty to one day's rest than traveling to altitude? Is the care to win factor what determines success? Will the Nuggets care more or less about winning regular season games this year?
Okay, so back-to-backs versus traveling to altitude. I would definitely say, so the altitude question is dependent on if it's which conference the team plays in and if they're on what game of a road trip they're on. So if it's a West Coast team that's doing a 3-game road trip and they have their 3rd game in altitude, That's not that bad. If it's an East Coast team and they've been on the West Coast for a week and their last game is in altitude, that team is just going to pack it up and be done. Like Denver should
the
have
Orlando Magic had no problem
but
coming back from an 18-point deficit.
But think about that. Isn't that endemic to like Orlando's identity, that they're the team that responds to adversity and is willing to, like, they want the hard stuff because they're finding out how good they are.
Yeah.
But like, I'm trying to think.
Just also after that, was it a double overtime loss to the Kings? I think it was either a back-to-back for them or they were on one day's rest and they came to Denver and it was the last game of their road trip.
I'm pretty sure the Cavaliers didn't have anybody because they were all banged up. But like,
they were not.
If the Cavaliers have a 5-game road trip, even if they're fully healthy, and their last game is in Denver, they're losing that one. The care to win factor, I will say this: the biggest edge in any NBA game is motivation. Because the players are so unmotivated for the duration of them, which is, again, an inherent problem and a huge issue with the schedule. Like, you should have players being like getting geared up and can't wait to play their division rival who knocked them out of the playoffs last year. And instead it's like, I'm like, you talk to them and they'll say this, they'll be like, yeah, it's like, look, do I like that team? No, but I have another game in 48 hours after it. Like, we play there and then we leave and then we play again. That's like the life. And that's a huge problem. That's not how sports should be. It should not be how this is. Motivation is like a huge factor. One of the ones I liked was like LeBron at one point, I think, I don't remember what the exact record was. He had a huge winning streak versus Tobias Harris. Because Tobias, one of the nicest, kindest, sweetest dudes in the league, said something his rookie season to LeBron. And pissed him off.
LeBron had a vendetta against Tobias Harris, and it wasn't beneath him.
They got into it, and he came back and like won that game, and then there was like, it was like LeBron versus Tobias Harris for a while, just like destroying any team that Tobias was on, of all the people. It's like motivation is just always going to be a huge factor in these types of things. It's the biggest factor because in an 82-game season, you're not going to have motivation most nights. Draymond Green's talked about this. You think that he said, quote, if you think with my engine, I'm going to get up for the Kings on a Tuesday? And like, that's how it is. So anytime that there's
they get up for those Kings games.
Now,
well, maybe now.
I'll also say that. Yeah, they do now. I'll also say this. This is the most impressive thing about Boston. Boston gets up for every game until March when they secured the number 1 seed. And then it was like they blew 2 games of the Hawks and allowed the Cavs to come back from like 30 points down.
Oh my God. I remember that sequence. It was like their only 3-game losing streak of the season.
Yeah. They had already secured the 1 seed. But before then, they don't have those nights where it's like, they just didn't have it. Denver had a bunch of those. That's okay. Most teams do. But that's the most impressive thing to me about Boston is Boston does not have nights where they just don't have it. They have it. 3 members of the starting unit will definitely care and care more about the regular season. Because one of them is in a new role. One of them is a professional who brings it every single night. And another one of them is on pace for what I think is going to be a career year for him. None of those players will make an all-star team. Those 3 players are very likely to care more about this regular season. That's what I will say. And I think the rest of the team will. And I think Malone cares about every game. To not be polite, I just think Jokic is insanely bored by regular season NBA. I just think it is just a job to him. And I don't think it's great for team morale, but I also think it's hard to complain about the guy that averages 27, 12, and 9. So it's just hard to complain about the man. He's the best in the league, and his attitude does not change how good he is on the floor or how much they win by with him. But I do think that he is bored by it. I also think that his cohort, who also got a max contract, has not shown a definitive hunger yet. And if he proves me wrong, I would love to see that.
How many games until fans should be concerned about Jamal if they aren't already? And how long until the noise surrounding Jamal gets too loud for him to ignore? Which, I mean, I don't
know how much louder the noise could possibly be.
I mean, the answer is, I have to reverse. There's no amount of noise because he's certified. He was a playoff killer who averaged 30 on 50, 40, 90 in the Western Conference Finals and then had a 30-point triple-double in the Heat. Versus the Heat. You can't say anything to him. How many guys in the league, and I do this all the time where I'm like, he's not a 16 gamer. Great player, but you can't win in the playoffs with him. So it's like if Jamal were to kill in the regular season, it doesn't help him any because it's like the question would just be like, yeah, but what about last year's playoffs when you completely disappointed? So like in part, I don't. It's worked for him so far. Like being a really good, not elite, non-all-star level regular season player who's a killer monster in the playoffs got him 2 max contracts. It's worked. So there's no amount of noise that's ever going to do it. As far as the concern level, does the concern do you any good? Because they're not trading him. They can't trade him.
Yeah.
They can't trade him. You might as well just like settle in and hope for the best. And I'm not saying that he's going to be bad. He might have a career year. Maybe this is the year when he does it. He is the king of turning expectations. You know, it was like before the bubble run, I texted like a Nuggets media group chat, hot take, I think this is the last playoff run with Jamal because he's going to get traded. And then he dropped 2 50-point performances and they made the conference finals. Like last year, it was like, hey, full off season, won the title, learned all these lessons. Jamal's coming. This is the year. Nope.
Yeah.
So he defies expectation. That's the only thing I can tell you. But there's no reason to. I would tell you that as far as like are you going to feel good about Jamal? Probably not for a while. And I don't know what that means or why. But nothing seems really good right now. And the knee stuff is all the comments are vague, which is never a good sign. But there's also a very high probability that Jamal Murray drops a 30.9 assist performance on an opening night win versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like to me, that's very much on the table. So
9 assists versus the Thunder. How many turnovers?
Hey, Jamal's turned into a really great playmaker. I actually like him more as a
Yes.
playmaker, pure point guard than I do as like a high volume scorer at this point.
Yeah, especially in the regular season.
All right, we got one from Magic Kimura. What is one bad team you think will be even worse than expected, and one good team that will be better than expected in each conference?
My worst team for the East is the Hawks. I think they're just not good. Yeah, and losing DeJounte. I know the fit with him, with Trey and DeJounte wasn't good, but also I just don't think that team is good. I think the Spurs are going to be worse than expected because the West is terrible and there is literally no reason for them to not tank. So I would expect them to maybe be better in terms of their point differential. Like they're just going to look like a more competent basketball team because they have a point guard in Chris Paul now and someone who will get the ball to Wemby, but I don't think they're going to be incentivized to win more games. Better than expected, I've got the Bucks because they have Giannis. Like everything went wrong for them last year and they still managed to win 49 games. In the West, I have the Nuggets because I just think they're going to figure it out. I think they just have a really high floor.
You and Swipa should get together and do a show. He's the eternal optimist. All right, so worse in the East, I will say the Washington Wizards. I think that team is broken. And they have like a lot of actual NBA players, and the fact that they're this bad that's even a worse sign. So like it's hard to be worse than they're expected. That's how bad I think the Wizards are going to be.
Wow.
Better in the East. This one's actually kind of tough for me, given the good team that's supposed to be better. This one's kind of tough because I'm pretty much under across the board on most of them. I will go ahead and say I will say I like that Bucks pick because I like the way that they looked the other night when they had Gary Trent and Taurean Prince in the starting unit. I was like, oh, this is a lot of length. I like this. But I'm going to take the cop out. The Boston Celtics are only expected to win.
I knew you were going
to. They're going to win like 63, 65.
And you have all those colleagues of yours who are Knicks fans that are down on the Celtics-ish, downish on the Celtics right now.
Yep. So that's my East team. Western Conference, worse than expected. There's actually a number of interesting ones here. I'm going to go with Utah. Tony Jones, I was last night kind of like being convinced that they're going to finish no worse than 7th. And I don't know, man. I know they got a win versus the Kings, who are winless in preseason.
Oh, 7th in the league.
Yeah, in the league for the draft positioning. Cody Williams, Keyshawn George looks like he made a jump, which is like, that's a very notable thing, is like if he makes a jump now, it's like, okay, you got Markkanen and George, maybe Cody Williams. Okay. And it might just be one of those years where it's like, yeah, a bunch of guys that we don't know, they're pretty good. But I will go the other way and just be like, I think that everything about trading Markkanen was a fake out. They were always going to extend him. It was doing due diligence before the extension. They have no expectations of winning this season, and that they will shut down Markkanen by January, and they will tank their faces off and get Cooper Flagg to go with George and Markkanen and Cody Williams and be in a really good spot. So I will say the Utah Jazz, worse than expected. And better, I'm going to go with the Phoenix Suns. I kind of resisted because I was like, I don't know if they're going to buy in, but seeing them in person and seeing both of Vibes and talking to Budenholzer and seeing some of their numbers across the preseason, they're buying in, man. And if you have that talent and you buy into Mike Budenholzer, you're going to win a ton of games. Mike's a great coach, and they're going to win a ton of games. So I regret to inform Nuggets fans that the Suns are going to be a pain in the ass this season.
Yeah, last question from Big Honey Z.
Zach is not currently enjoying every Nuggets tweet is the name on this account.
Okay.
Big Honey Z is the handle.
Oh, okay. So he's pretty down on the Nuggets. Everyone wants to play 5-out offense these days. Do you think there's a playable Jokic plus shooters lineup that will get close to that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the only thing is, like, why would you play 5-out when you have Nikola?
Agreed.
Right.
It's just like, why would you take that off of the table as a menu option? This like perfectly cooked bird of post-ups. Why would you take that off? And so now and also Nikola hasn't hit a 3-pointer in like a long, it's been good. The 3-point shot's getting a little concerning. I don't necessarily think that there is like a capability of doing that. Like, look, I think if you move MPJ to 4, you sub out Aaron, and Peyton's 3-pointer all of a sudden is like, hey, he's 37%. That gets you pretty close. Murray, Strother, Peyton, MPJ, Yoke.
That's literally my lineup.
Yeah. You can that one spaces extremely well. Jokic is never really, so much of him is about maximizing him is about making reads and forcing the defense into a sequence. And a lot of 5-out offense is just like, hey, this is hard to guard. Switching is a very simple solution. 5-out is the counter, very simple solution. That's why it was so popular. It's simple, effective, and easy to understand. It's harder to do stuff around Yoke, but the payoffs I think are greater.
Yeah, it's different. I think shooting is important, but it's not everything in 5-out, which is why I had Peyton in my lineup.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole like read and react part of it, you got to have the right personnel. Not everybody's the Golden State Warriors.
Okay, we're going to talk about these coaching changes and whether or not you're higher or lower on whether they will be a better or worse regular season team. I mean, you just spoke about
But as a result of the coaching changes,
Yeah, as a
his team.
Vaughn getting replaced with Jordy Fernandez.
I don't know whether I should have been low on Jack Vaughn is the thing. Like, I just don't know. That team was quite bad. I'm going to go with neutral on this one.
Oh, is
I
that
just
even
don't
a
know.
response? Okay.
I just don't know if Jordy's going to help that team, even if they're not winning games, because they are in the tank for a Cooper flag right now. I don't know if they're going to be playing more coherent basketball.
I don't think it's Vaughn's fault, but I'll say better. And the reason is last year that team just collectively quit. And I got a lot of thoughts on Mikal Bridges because of that outcome. This season, I think it's like, yeah, look, we're going to lose, but we can play good basketball together. And that vibe alone, I think, is going to be helpful. And I like some of the stuff I've seen in preseason. Again, I think Jacques Vaughn, if he began a genuine chance, might have had a better opportunity. I think he supposedly had the ear of the players, and then he just didn't. And that to me is he has been put in unfair positions in the league repeatedly, and it sucks, especially because I think he's a better coach now than when he was in Orlando. But yeah, I will go with they're going to be better this season.
All right. Next is the Hornets because Steve Clifford has been replaced with Charles Lee.
I'll just go with better because I have a lot of respect for the Celtics coaching staff, and Charles Lee seems to have a lot of respect around the league. I liked what I've seen from the Hornets in preseason, honestly, especially on defense. So I'm going to go with higher.
I will say better too. Higher. I will go higher because the vibes are like way better with this team. Like the vibes are through the roof. He took the core members of the team to Boston to be in the locker room when Boston was in the finals, so that they could be around and see what it's like to be in that kind of environment. That's like a little thing that I think I noticed. They're playing with a lot more cohesion on both ends of the floor. There's a lot of buy-in right now from the guys. I still don't like some of their roster decisions in terms of keeping the knuckleheads around, but there is a better cultural accouability there.
Is that what we're calling them?
Yeah. Well, some of them are knuckleheads, and one of them is just a jackass and a terrible human. Cliff, I've interviewed Cliff. He has had some really good coaching years, and he's so respected around the league. But he didn't have their ear at all. He just could not. And some of these guys get to a point where the generations are so different, Lee, I think, definitely has him, and I think that Lee's going to make him a lot better this season.
Next is the Wizards, who we know kind of where you stand on them because our old friend Wes Unseld Jr. is no longer there.
Poor Wes.
And replaced with Brian Keefe.
Lower. I liked Wes a lot. I liked the kinds of I thought they were. I thought the Wizards were actually quite creative. I thought that they had. I liked their shot profile sometimes, even though the process got messy at times. They weren't consistent. They were just not a consistent team. But you could see flashes of oh, they do know how to play basketball sometimes. So that's gone now. I'm gonna go with lower.
Yeah, I'll go lower. I don't expect this. With respect to Keith, maybe Keith gets the most out of him, and it's the start of an incredible story. But at this point, I think he's an interim coach for a year, and then he's gone. And then they turn the page with hopefully another number 1 pick and move on.
All right, let's go to Phoenix and go Vogel for Bud.
Okay, gotta go higher because Bud probably put his foot down and said, "You guys better get me a point guard." And he went out and recruited Tyus Jones and told him he's going to start. And now he's starting Tyus Jones, and now they're going to have fewer turnovers. They're apparently going to be shooting more threes, which is good for them. I question the defense, but not because of Bud. I just think they're really small. So I'm going to go with higher.
I'm going to go with higher because I've heard that they bought into Bud and they didn't buy into Vogel. And I don't think that's anything that Frank Vogel did. I think it's just the whims of their stars. I think that they have a real problem with the volatility, and Bud better make sure that he doesn't push too hard or not push enough. He's going to have to walk a very delicate line with that particular trio of individuals.
All right, going to a team where maybe they're underrated slightly, and go to the Bucks for Adrian Griffin. I mean, he got replaced last season, mid-season, by Doc Rivers. Now the Doc's got a full season ahead of him. Where do you guys fall on this?
I'm going to let Matt go first on this one.
Oh, God, so much higher. Good Lord, through the roof. Here's what sucks is much like Steven Silas, Griffin was so well regarded around the league, and everyone was very excited for him to get a shot. Steven Silas was one of the most respected assistant coaches, and everybody's he's gonna be a great head coach. And it's the same thing with Griffin, and it was just an abject disaster. From day one, it was bad, and they were completely lost. And you had Bobby Portis.
They had me thinking that the Hawks were good because of those games.
And when Chris Middleton is seriously, we have to when Middleton's outspoken, it's a problem. And Brooke Lopez is complaining, openly complaining on the court. It was a disaster. So Rivers is higher, even if the ceiling with Doc is so low.
Yeah, I'll go with higher. Mostly a vibes thing. I don't know that Doc does anything in terms of changing how they play. I know that he's talked about wanting to get Giannis and Dame to run more pick and rolls together, and they definitely, reverted back to playing Brooke in a drop because Brooke is just not in a stage in his career where he can play in other schemes. They have some other, roster limitations on that end defensively, but I don't know. I just don't know how much involvement he's actually going to have in changing particularly the offensive side of the ball. But I think vibes wise and just keeping the players happy, it's gonna be a positive.
All right, in Detroit, Monty is out and JB Bickerstaff's in.
Oh my God. We had so many coaching changes last year. This is crazy. I'm going to go higher. I am so skeptical of JB Bickerstaff as a coach, but the regular season results don't lie. I think the Pistons, they started from such a floor that it is difficult. And there's no Killian Hayes on the roster that JB could, start over their other young players. He can organize them a little bit. And I also like what I've seen from the Pistons this preseason as well. Just Cade looks to be in a lot more control, and they just kind of look like they know what they're trying to do, even if it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, I'll go higher, and would love to disagree on some of these, but no. The best number I have on this is Monty every year of his career, going back to Phoenix. I don't have the New Orleans numbers. They have been bottom 5 in expected field goal percentage. So they literally take the least efficient shots. JB has been top 10 every year in Cleveland. So JB's model is very simple, which is hey, let's just defend really well and take easier shots, more efficient shots. Now, if you want to respond with yeah, but the Cavs offense was not good. Sure. but not good is so much better than where the Pistons offense has been the last 4 years. So there's look, I also did a lot of Detroit film this summer. God help me. There was just so much, like, it's either that Monty was like, hey, Cade, you're going to need to figure out your game and how to get to your spots against tough defenses. So I want you to go out there and just ISO and do this. Or Monty Williams was literally on the sideline, just like, do whatever. I don't care. I'm making $50 million. Because
and I didn't want to be here. The reason they're overpaying me is because I didn't want to be.
Didn't want the job in the first place.
Yeah,
there was no effort to get Cade into more optimal matchups. It was just like run your head into a brick wall over and over and over again for him and Ivy. That won't happen now. So it's got to be higher.
So going from that simple coaching strategy of Bickerstaff, who left the Cavs, and Atkinson is now in, is he going to make the Cavs offense
I'm actually
better?
wondering if we're going to disagree on this one. I'm going to go lower. And it's not because I'm super high on Jamie Bickerstaff, as I stated previously. And he had clearly lost the locker room in Cleveland. And I was very critical. I don't remember if I was on this show, but I was critical of him for going on SiriusXM radio and implying that Jarrett Allen should have just toughed it out and taken some shot and played in the playoffs with the rib injury last year by saying, oh, wow, Luka's so tough. Love that. Hate that, frankly. However, he did keep that team relatively organized. I am low on the Cavs formula roster-wise, but in terms of like this team kind of like knows what they're trying to get to. Like they were very organized. Kenny Atkinson is coming from a Golden State Warriors system, which is very different than literally everything else in the NBA. I know he was a head coach before. He was with the Nets before as well. But in terms of being a regular season team, where I think discipline and like everybody just knowing what they need to do on a consistent night in, night out basis, I think it's going to be a downgrade just by virtue of the floor that Bickerstaff had set for them. Even if they might be a better playoff team, might do some more creative stuff and like figure things out offensively later on. But I'm going to go lower.
It's an interesting take. I mean, I think you can argue that they found out last year that they need to simplify things to get the most out of their roster, which causes problems with the roster construction.
Yes.
I'll still say higher. And the reason I'll say higher is Atkinson's one-on-one player development could lead to absolutely huge growths for Garland and Mobley, how to use those guys. And Karis LeVert was great under Atkinson. So I think there's a very high ceiling here still with Atkinson.
All right, so last and maybe least is the Lakers, who has Darvin Ham, maybe the coach that was thrown under the bus arguably the most last season, for the hot shot, JJ Redick coming in. How do you guys feel about this?
I'm gonna go neutral. I think it's really hard to just become a head coach in the NBA. Lakers fans screaming at the top of their lungs about all the things that Darvin Ham was doing wrong. I think underestimate the difficulty of the task of being a head coach for LeBron. And with that Lakers team in particular, where you have so many really experienced players that just kind of do what they want to do. I'm going to go neutral because I really don't think that what they do really on either end, like there might be things that they're targeting that's different, but in terms of what they execute and like the kind of broader strokes of what that team's going to look like isn't going to change much. And if anything, has a lower floor because JJ has no experience dealing with managing a team over an 82-game season. But I'll be generous and say neutral.
I'll say higher. And like a lot of this is like revealing of every coaching move seems higher because it's like, oh, they fired this guy because he was bad and they hired somebody else that's better. But Redick's a really thoughtful guy. He at least has plans and designs. Whether that's going to be too complicated for this roster is a real question. Also, but this is like the simplest one. He has LeBron's buy-in for now. At least to start, he has LeBron's buy-in, and that's way better than Ham, who he was completely out on, and that's all that really matters. So I will go higher on here with the caveat that I do think Ham was unfairly maligned by Lakers fans.
All right, well, that wraps up all the segments, our mega episode we did with Matt. You know, when Grace and I were first talking about starting a pod, we definitely bonded over how much we appreciate Matt's analysis. And, you know, his analysis is something to aspire to. So Thank you so much for coming on and
that.
taking the time to do that for sure. Is there anything else you want to say before
Anything
we?
you want to plug?
I mean,
No, but
Find Matt everywhere.
yeah.
no, I would just say you guys do a great job, and I love the show, and it's absolutely awesome, and you're both really insightful, and I appreciate you guys having me. I do have to run now because I have to pick up my kiddo.
Okay.
No
awesome.
worries. You
Thanks,
can
guys.
jump out of here. All right, that concludes this episode. Please stay tuned for our reaction to the opening night of the NBA season. We are so excited to jump into real
Excited,
regular season
scared.
basketball games. Listeners, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1K subs, so please subscribe if you liked what you heard on today's episode. Leave us a review if you're listening to us on any podcast platforms. And follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. And if you're on TikTok, it's What's in a Game NBA with periods in between each word. And also subscribe to our Clip channel. And remember, winning is fun. And hopefully we get a lot of winning in the regular season. And not a lot of losing, because losing really sucks.